capture is on. Skype presentation is going. Howdy, everybody. We're now live with a truly live edition of the podcast. I'm your host, and as always, today on my illustrious panel, we've got my YouTube comrades, AK Rex and Chris Grossi. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Okay. And also joining me in the audience, joining me on co-host detail is my longtime editor and monster hunter, Sir Scott Mardis.
Hello.
And as for the guest of honor, we are welcoming back the very first scientist we ever had on the show. However many years ago that was. That's
It's been some time.
Oh yes, indeed. That would be the voice of Dr. Thomas R. Holtz, University of Maryland, extraordinary. Not much more introduction needs me. So welcome back, Doc.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So my just first question is, what have you been up to lately, research-wise, and everything else in the years since our last session, and how has the pandemic affected your line of work and all that?
Wow. Yeah, a couple of big questions there. So in terms of, since the last time I was on, let's see, I think some of the main papers that have come out that I've been part of was the look at agility in carnivorous dinosaurs that I was on a big team with that came out in 2018. And then in 2019, a paper that looked at the benefits to long legs in carnivorous dinosaurs and how it the benefits differ if you're a small, that is 1 ton or smaller individual versus a big guy. The title of the paper, or the beginning of the title, was "The Fast and the Frugal." Basically, it showed that the longer hind limbs for individuals of 1 ton or less is higher speed, and that above 1 ton, longer legs don't really necessarily give you higher speed, but it does decrease the cost of locomotion, and it makes you more efficient. And so the sort of takeaway from that is smaller, long-legged dinosaurs were sprinters, big, long-legged dinosaurs were marathoners. And then earlier this year, Dave Hone and I came out with a paper that examined the ecology of Spinosaurus, and where we came to the conclusion that the weight of the evidence suggested that it was not primarily an aquatic swimming pursuit predator, as some people have perceived in recent years, but rather was a shoreline generalist, that it combined wading and swimming and so forth, and so was stalking the shorelines just as much as it might have been in the water, and even in the water, it wasn't necessarily swimming after large prey. And I have just sent in my page proofs for a long ongoing research project that I've had on looking at the distinctions between the community of carnivorous dinosaurs in the Tyrannosaur-dominated part of the world and time, so the latest Cretaceous of Asia and North America, as compared to the rest of dinosaur history, and how in this later part of dinosaur history, that tyrannosaurs did not share their environment with a lot of medium-sized predators, the way allosaurs did, and so that tyrannosaurs seem to have evolved adaptations to take advantage of being the medium-sized predators when they're young and being the giant-sized predators when they're grown-ups. And so those are sort of the main papers that I've had come out, or just about to have come out, in the time since the last time I was on the show. And how has the pandemic affected our work? Well, I've not been in the field for a long time. It's been a while since I've been able to actually touch a fossil bone or walk around on rocks. So we're not doing very much collecting these days. And I haven't even been behind the scenes in the collections at the Smithsonian, which is my the closest museum to me, and I have an affiliate position, an associate position there. But the research side at the Smithsonian is still currently very restricted. In fact, even the exhibits have been off limits since the beginning of the pandemic, although we got the announcement just yesterday that the Natural History Museum will open its halls again on June 18th. It'll be timed entry, so you have to get tickets in advance, but it'll be free as it always is at the Smithsonian. So that's a good thing. And teaching has been rather different. I mean, very few of us train as educators for online teaching and the online delivery of courses, just as most students weren't really prepared for it either. So we've had to learn all types of ways to best deliver the course in a fashion that's effective and equitable. And I've survived through this year, picked up some techniques that might be useful in the future, but am very much looking forward to being back in front of an actual audience, an actual body of students in person in the fall when that comes around. So it's been weird, but of course that's true for every one of us out there. So.
Oh yeah, we've all
I can
had.
actually, yeah, I just looked over here for the moment. You said, what do I? Actual. Oh, hang on. With the image in the background, you can't see actual page proofs. Only you can't see them because there they are. Actual page proofs for a paper. So.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, so, yeah.
Cool. So.
So, do you consider Spinosaurus a quadruped or a biped?
Yeah, I think the idea, the hypothesis of quadrupedality in Spinosaurus wasn't particularly well supported to begin with, and is gotten weaker as time has gone on. That we don't have the forelimbs of Spinosaurus associated with the skeleton, the rest of the skeleton of Spinosaurus. So we don't know the actual proportions of the front limbs. And so it seems unlikely that they were quadrupeds. There are rumors, and I've seen pictures online, that someone has the forelimbs of Spinosaurus in private collections. And if this is correctly attributed, and if the proportions are accurate, that really shows that it's not a quadruped, because those forelimbs that they've shown, that I've seen pictures of, don't show real weight-bearing function.
Are there any associated footprints?
Sadly not. That would be very cool. We don't even know exactly what a quadrupedal footprints might look like on a Spinosaurus, since there's, unless they highly modified their wrists from other theropods, the theropod can't do this. Can't put its hands into this position.
That's my question.
So
my stream chat should be able to still hear me okay.
So was it knuckle walking,
like
a giant ground sloth might, or what? And that was never really certain for the people who advocated quadrupedality. And now, if these forelimbs that are in private hands are accurate,
Skype's muted,
it really looks like it clearly was not weight bearing anyway. It's not that strange though, because it's got a weird proportions as far as we can tell. But pangolins do too, and pangolins, at least some species of pangolin, are bipeds. Some of them are indeed quadrupeds, and most of them are quadrupeds some of the time.
That's weird why the dinosaurs never produced a quadrupedal predator, isn't it? Maybe those niches were all tied up by crocodilians?
Well, it may simply be that, dinosaurs started off, A, as carnivores, and B, as bipeds, and as striding bipeds, and that if you already can be a striding biped, what's the real advantage to becoming a quadruped? Especially because you would probably lose whatever predatory advantages of your hands when you begin to adapt them to be weight-bearing. Looks like, for instance, most of the quadrupedal crocodilians and proto-crocodilians didn't use their hands in acquiring prey. They were just support for walking. So becoming a quadrupedal predator, a dinosaur would be losing, one of its main set of weapons, its forelimbs. And yeah, sure, there are other carnivorous dinosaurs that lose that as a weapon, Tyrannosaurs being one example, Abelisaurs being another. But if you already had these claws and then became a quadruped, it might not be as easy for them to use it.
Yeah.
Also, thinking about it as well, now that you've had this question, another aspect that theropod dinosaurs have that none of the other predatory groups of animals have is they've got a wishbone. So their clavicles, which in us are the separate collarbones, are fused together in a wishbone. That means they're the two shoulder girdles, the scapulocoracoids, have to come pretty close together towards the middle for the furcula to connect between the two of them. So it might be that they really can't get
They just don't have the range of motion.
Yeah, sort of in a good weight-bearing position that could also be used for proper locomotion.
Yeah.
And so that might have constrained them.
I'm gonna mute for a second. Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. Why we have don't have any truly fully quadrupedal theropod dinosaurs. Makes sense to me, indeed. So, okay, who wants to go next?
I'll go next.
All right, go for it.
All right, Dr. Holtz, it's great to talk to you, and a pleasure to be in this podcast. And so my first question is about Tyrannosaurus. And so, with the latest article on Teratophonius cori in Utah, is social behavior in Tyrannosaurs getting more traction, or do you believe that more evidence needs to be discovered?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of both, I think, actually. That the more instances we have of multiple individuals of the same species, in this case of Tyrannosaur, found preserved together, especially if they're different ages, the better evidence that there is for some sort of social behavior, just because statistically it might not be that hard to get such a group of fossils, once in a while. But as it becomes more common, then you have to say, well, this is maybe reflecting something in life. That said, it's certainly true that we get mobbing behavior in crocodiles or in Komodo dragons. So you'll get a group of them together at a time, even feeding at the same place, but they're not actually working cooperatively. So we do have to be cautious about that. There are other possibilities. So it's not 100% slam dunk, but as I said, the more cases we have of it, the more it looks like it might be a possibility, at least for some species. Something else we have to be concerned with is just because one or two members of a group have a behavior doesn't actually mean that all of them do. So the classic example are the big cats. Lions have prides and have a great social structure, and tigers for the most part are solitary. And cheetahs are solitary or operate in pairs or things of that nature. So we have to be a little cautious that if Teratophonius and Albertosaurus are doing it, doesn't necessarily mean that Tarbosaurus and Tyrannosaurus are doing it, although they might have. And to add to that too, we do have some footprint evidence of multiple individuals of Tyrannosaurs moving together from British Columbia. Now that's in that case, it's individuals the same body size, which actually turns out to be something we see a lot with dinosaurs. We'll find, for at least some of them, we'll find a bunch of footprints or a bunch of bodies that are like exactly the same age as each other. And so Dave Verricchio has suggested that this might be a common dinosaur trait, that a particular, I don't know what you would call it, pod, one particular hatchling group, a cohort, hang together throughout their life for a while, but maybe not have a group with multiple individuals of different ages. Now, there are cases like the duckbills and the horned dinosaurs that definitely show that, with little babies up to big adults that were found dead together in multiple occasions. So those ones almost certainly had things that we would recognize as a herd. But it might be that some dinosaurs had a social structure that isn't particularly common today, but may have been back then, with just a particular brood or hatching or whatever you want to call it, moving together as a group.
Yeah, I was actually kind of thinking the same way too, because there's just so much that we can find out there, but also there's stuff that is also not found yet, and so that's I appreciate that answer.
Sure.
And And I mean, you talked about Spinosaurus recently. Since the anatomy keeps changing on Spinosaurus, is there more likely that we could find more Spinosaurus specimens that could be suggesting that we could have maybe full-grown adult compared to juvenile at some point?
Yeah, well, hopefully. I mean, Nizar Ibrahim, who's been leading the expeditions to Morocco that have produced many of these wonderful specimens. Some of them were collected previously, but other ones are his team has been uncovering, and he's been the lead author on a number of these papers. Promises there's actually plenty of new material that's in their collections that they haven't gotten around to describing yet. So looking forward to seeing what they find. But yeah, that's one thing. We definitely need a greater sample size for Spinosaurus to address issues of, how do juveniles compare to adults? Is there sexual dimorphism within the species? What do the proportions of most complete one, middle of the torso through the hips, the legs, and the tail. And then we've got other individuals who've got the head and part of the neck or the front end or the middle of the body. But we don't have anyone where we go from the tip of the snout to the tail for most of the body, so we actually know what the proportions look like. And so a lot of that still remains guesswork. So hopefully more discoveries will come out to help us understand that. And then also to help compare it with other Spinosaurids, because we have a better sense of what the proportions of at least one individual of Baryonyx looks like, and one individual of Suchomimus, but we'd like to have more of those. And Ichthyovenator from Southeast Asia, we've gotten the original specimen, and there's new material coming out on that's been presented at some conferences that will help us know what its proportions are like better. And it's just a very odd-looking batch of dinosaurs, and we definitely want to know more what they look like.
Yeah. The Spinosaurs are so strange compared to the other theropods that are in the phylogeny, so to speak. My final question, it's based on like what you were as a student and during your times of like learning about paleontology and getting your PhD, is what was the best advice your professors or mentors gave you of being in the science of paleontology?
Ooh, that's a good question. Probably the best advice was to read widely. That you want to look at as many different types of research out there, because mostly breakthroughs don't really come from the super narrow focus. And unfortunately, the way research and teaching is often structured is to get really narrow focused on one thing and doing it really well. And that's good. And it's good to be able to do certain techniques really well. But the big changes come when you take an insight from a totally different field and apply it to your own, or multiple fields and apply it to your own. And you can get synthetic knowledge that way. And so in order to make sure you do that, you do want to make sure that you can read widely in different related fields and see what might come up, to draw on a little bit of biomechanics from here and physiology from there and ecology from there, and then find a new way of stitching it together. I think that's probably the most important bit of advice. I think something that no one told me at the time, but in hindsight would have been more useful, is get involved in lots of projects if you can early on. You'll get a lot of experience in different types of research, and you'll be able to make lots of different contacts, because getting to know different people in your and related fields is just super useful, because you can find out about you might be able to take advantage of someone at some situation. Someone might say, hey, I want to go on an expedition to somewhere and we need another body. Do you want to go? Well, that'd be great. Or things like that. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Since I'm kind of in the social aspect of the paleontology field, and I am I've worked for a nonprofit museum, and I appreciate your answers, and hopefully this could actually also help me out as a learner in paleontology, and also for my YouTube channel too. So
Sure.
I appreciate that, and thank you for answering my questions.
Sure, yeah, no, not a problem.
Yeah, my chat's starting to come alive here, Doctor. It's one of my moderators. Carol says hello to you.
Oh, hello.
Yep, she's loving the show so far. So, Carol, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask the good doctor, now's your chance. But anyhow, I did get some audience questions while we were talking here, of course.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them from my friend Zicker Studio about Godzilla, interestingly enough.
Cool.
Because I want to see your take on this hypothetical question. I've seen this response from Dr. Ken Carpenter and my friend Denny Roth at G-Fest. First question from Zicker about Godzilla. If Godzilla could be classified as a dinosaur, what could he possibly be descended from? And if he actually existed, what might be the closest possible breed or variety of dinosaur might he also be?
Ooh, yeah. Good question. And of course, one would have to ask which Godzilla, since different movies have very...
Indeed, there have been variants on Godzilla, certainly.
So, yeah, exactly. So the new MonsterVerse version has gills. That's kind of a weird thing for a dinosaur to have. At least gill slits. Presumably there's gills on the inside. Although that would be pretty useful for an animal that spends, the vast majority of its time underwater. So, but sort of I guess the one case... Well, I think of 2 cases where there's a sort of a strong argument for what sort of dinosaur or dinosaur-like creature it might be. So in the very first Godzilla movie, the paleontologist Yamane, I can't remember his name.
Dr. Yamane, yeah. Shinichi Yamane.
Yes. Yeah. It speculates that that Godzilla is something intermediate between marine reptiles and dinosaurs. Now, what exactly that would be, because there's no, the marine reptile group, which actually does look like there is a group that encompasses most of the marine reptiles. So ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and a bunch of their relatives. And dinosaurs, that's a very distant relation there. So that's not super helpful there. But in the 1990s, or maybe it was latest 80s.
Heisei era.
Versus King Ghidorah. In that one, you see a pre-mutated Godzilla, and it's pretty clearly some sort of generic theropod, maybe Carcharodontosaur-like. It doesn't, being a Toho Suitmation monster, it doesn't quite have the proportions one would expect of an actual real dinosaur, but probably something in that basal tetanurine, as we might say, sort of the megalosaur through allosaur part of the tree. It doesn't show particularly tyrannosaurid attributes, and that's sort of sufficiently generic that you can then mutate it in all sorts of interesting ways. I remember Ken Carpenter, I think, argued that it was a ceratosaur of some sort, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've read that chapter that he did. Now, of course, sometimes you see it with 3 weight-bearing toes. With 4 weight-bearing toes, which would be unusual for a true theropod, but it might arguably, therefore, be a Herrerasaur. So Herrerasaurs... people are most familiar with Herrerasaurus, which is one of the most completely known ones, are a very early group of dinosaurs. They're restricted to the late Triassic, and a recent paper came out that shows us that most, but not all, most of the carnivorous dinosaurs of the late Triassic form this group, Herrerasauria, which is distinct from theropods. So the Herrerasaurs are, in their analysis, a group that is closer to the sauropodomorph plus theropod group than it is to ornithischians, but are still basically one of the earliest branches of dinosaurs. So, making Godzilla the largest and most specialized Herrerasaur. Maybe that'll work. So let's see. What else did they say? What would be the closest breed of variety of dinosaur if he existed? Yeah. I'll go out of.
I think Herrerasaur was the last thing I was expecting, but that's good to see something different from what I've seen mentioned before about Godzilla being a possible real dinosaur type.
Yeah, yeah. So that's at least give it an original version. I'll say it's a Herrerasaur, the world's largest Herrerasaur.
That's not too far off out of that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie there. I think Denny went with some sort of, Garganopsid type creature. At least with
Sure.
Monster vs. Godzilla,
Okay.
I think he said something along those lines.
Right.
And Carol asks, "How do you not get so tongue-tied? Amazing, so eloquent." She says,
Oh. Well, I try.
"Yeah,
Uh,
public speaking is a gift of yours, Doctor, if I do say so."
Thank you.
It's a gift.
Yes.
It's a gift indeed. Another question I got from Alex asked, "How large did the footprints of Tyrannosaurus Rex get, based on what we know of from the fossil record?"
Right. There are a set of possible adult T-Rex tracks that are known. One set is actually on a golf course in the suburbs of Denver. There is a site in near Denver, and it's a privately owned golf course, but they let people go onto the site where through a little bit of odd geology, when the Front Range, so the part of the Rockies that are right near Denver, came up a lot of rocks there, and so you're seeing on the underside of the surface, and there are Triceratops tracks and what look to be Tyrannosaurus tracks. There are raindrop marks, and it's actually a pretty cool site. And those Tyrannosaur tracks, if I remember correctly, are about a meter or so. So that's a good-sized individual. It's not larger individuals could produce even bigger tracks, but those are among the biggest. There are young Tyrannosaur tracks from the same age in Wyoming, but they're much smaller. They're about yay big or so, maybe like that, and are probably produced by an individual about the size of Jane, which is this young individual, 12 to 13-year-old individual that's on display at the Burpee Museum in Rockford, Illinois. And so, uh, so that's it for the size of the footprints of T-Rex. Hopefully people will find some more, but the trick is always finding good track sites in the formations that also have good skeletal records, because there's some cases where we've got some formations where the tracks are really excellent, but we don't find many bodies, so we don't find many body skeletons, or vice versa, where the body skeletons are wonderful, but the sediments weren't really the right ones to include lots of tracks. So it's nice when we find a formation where we get both, because then we can sort of tie the two together.
Alright, be right back. I just gotta fix it over in my stream now. So, AK,
Sure.
if you want to take your shot at your first set of questions, go for it.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Gregory for arranging this meeting and inviting me over. That's very considerate of you, Greg, and thank you very much. And I want to thank Dr. Holtz for taking time to come on. And looking great, Dr. Holtz, first things first.
Great.
And now I've got a few questions. First set of questions I have are specifically about Tyrannosaurs. And then there are some that are more general theropod questions. So I hope that's okay with you as well.
Not a problem.
Perfect. So the first Tyrannosaur question in regards to, well, it's a bit of a cliche, so we'll get that out of the way first. It's the dilemma of Nanotyrannus lancensis, and specifically the main point is, how would understanding and studying the Bloody Mary specimen clear up the situation at all? And if it does, what sort of information is contained in that specimen that can help clear up that information?
Sure, great question. And for those who don't know, the so-called Bloody Mary specimen was a small tyrannosaur, so small as tyrannosaurs go, found from the Hell Creek Formation on private land, and which was being it had been on the market and failed to sell for a while, but then finally wound up getting bought by the North Carolina Museum at the North Carolina State University. And a big part of the arrangements were that the preparation of the specimen is going to be public. So they're building a new preparation lab that people can stand around and watch as they're preparing the specimen. One of the advantages of this specimen is it looks to be very complete. It will have presumably a good brain case that still needs to be prepared out, and the reason that's important is Jane's a wonderful specimen but lacks a brain case. This way it could be compared with the Cleveland specimen, which was the original one that Nanotyrannus was the name associated with. But the Cleveland specimen, the brain case has been somewhat crushed. So if there's an uncrushed brain case, that will be great. We'll be able to look at what the details look like of one of these individuals here. Famously, this new specimen has a complete arm, and that's good because we don't have complete arms of any Hell Creek tyrannosaurs. So even if it is separate from Tyrannosaurus Rex, we do not have a complete Tyrannosaurus Rex arm. If it is Tyrannosaurus Rex, we finally have a complete Tyrannosaurus Rex arm. And people operate under the idea of Rex arm, but in fact, no one's found one yet. So when you go to a museum, it's reconstructed, and when you reconstruct something, it's not always done 100%. It's not necessarily based on reality, and so this will give us more insight on what the flexibility of it is like. People will be able to histologically section it, so slice some of the bones, look at the microstructure of the bones, and see how old it was and if it's fully mature or not. So if it turns out that this specimen is fully mature, that would sort of be extremely strong evidence that it is in fact that Nanotyrannus is distinct from T-Rex. What we've been saying since 1999, and the first case of someone suggesting that Nanotyrannus was just the juvenile version of Tyrannosaurus Rex, is the way to disprove that hypothesis, that it's the juvenile, is to find an adult Nanotyrannus which is not T-Rex, or to find a, say, 10 to 13-year-old T-Rex, which is distinctly not the same thing as Nanotyrannus. And if you find either of those, then we've got sufficient evidence to say, okay, we can reject the idea that these specimens are the juveniles of T-Rex. But instead, what we get are little specimens, medium-sized ones that people argue as to what they are, and then the big adult ones that we say, okay, these are all T-Rex. So if you find a big adult Nanotyrannus, that would help show that it's not T-Rex. Or we find a 10, 11, 12, whatever year old T-Rex that is distinctly not Nanotyrannus, that would also support it. There's just a lot of information because of its completeness that this new specimen is going to help us sort out. And things like joint mobility that can help us understand locomotion in them better, to see if there are differences between, say, it and Jane, to see what sort of variations there are. I know that Lindsay Zano and her team have a lot of projects lined up involved with that, from the level of microstructures all the way up to the whole anatomy. And the fact that it was found in articulation is just wonderful, because we can get a good sense of the overall proportions and so forth.
So a follow-up it's like a double follow-up question to that.
Sure.
So first one is, can we reliably exclude the possibility that Nanotyrannus, air quotes here, is an Albertosaurin? And the second part of the question is, how long would you predict it would take to collect data from this Bloody Mary specimen? Okay,
so I think for the second part first, it's going to be years for the project, and even if we didn't have the pandemic, it would still be years. But of course, having the pandemic doesn't help in terms of setup and so forth. So I suspect there will be a bunch of different papers that will come out throughout the process. I don't know when the first paper might be, but I suspect 2 to 3 years we should have some really good, interesting new papers on it, and that will continue to provide new information even beyond that. As can we exclude it from being an Albertosaurine? Yeah, I mean, even if you accept Nanotyrannus as a distinct taxon from Tyrannosaurus rex, it actually has a number of shared derived features of the brain case and of the snout, which are shared with T-Rex and Tarbosaurus, which are not shared with Albertosaurus or Gorgosaurus. And so if it is a distinct from Tyrannosaurus, it probably is still a Tyrannosaurine. In fact, even there's even been this suggestion that maybe it is distinct from T-Rex, but is actually still its own species of Tyrannosaurus, and that Tyrannosaurus lancensis might be a second species within, the sister taxon to Tyrannosaurus rex. So lots of interesting possibilities that are out there. And I know even in the initial Nanotyrannus paper of Bacher et al. Back in the 80s, when they were looking at it, they were saying, initially it had been called a specimen of Gorgosaurus, but as they looked at it, now they saw a lot of Tyrannosaurus-like features. Features that they thought might be even more primitive as it all comes together. I did, just as an aside, in an analysis for a book that actually never got published, sadly, about a chapter I did for that I actually ran a version of a Tyrannosaur phylogeny where I threw Nanotyrannus in as its own taxon, even if it weren't saying it wasn't a juvenile T-Rex, but was its own form, and it came out as a sister taxon to Tyrannosaurus. So it does show Tyrannosaurus features.
And let's say we go along with this proposal, I would call it a proposal, that
Sure.
Tyrannosaurus and Nanotyrannus are the same taxon but sister species.
Mm-hmm.
How would that change the ecosystem of wherever respectively they're found in terms of their niche partitioning?
Right. So we'd wind up with something that's definitely not unprecedented, and that is if you go to the Namek Formation of Mongolia, that's one where we've got a small-bodied, slender tyrannosaur, that's Alioramus, side by side with a giant bruiser, that's Tarbosaurus. And so this might, if this is the situation, we would find that the Hell Creek is rather similar to the Namek, which wouldn't be super crazy. They are relatively close in time. And in both cases, they seem to lack the really huge herds of ceratopsians that earlier North American formations had, that had, side-by-side Daspletosaurus and a Albertosaurine, whether it's Albertosaurus or Gorgosaurus. And because in those ones, we've got these herds of thousands of individuals that are found together. And in the Hell Creek, we don't. We have some evidence of some group activity in Triceratops, but it looks like it might have been smaller herds, not giant herds. And then the same thing over in the Namek. They don't have ceratopsids in the Namek. So, and so maybe it's a situation that would be similar to that. So we will see how that all plays out when this new specimen is more fully prepared and integrated into a larger look. Or, if someone does find a good 11 to 13-year-old juvenile T-Rex that is not Nanotyrannus. That'd be another line of evidence, as I mentioned. So.
Sounds like a plan.
Yep.
So my next question, now moving away from Nanotyrannus and Tyrannosaurus, is about the Daspletosaurus species, actually. So first of all, I wanted to give your colleague a shout out, Dr. Thomas Carr, who described Daspletosaurus horneri, and meaning it's a second described species of Daspletosaurus, which appeared after Pterosis in a process called anagenesis. Now, my question mainly centered on the dinosaur parks formation Daspletosaurus, which in 1999, I believe, by Dr. Thom as well, was described as Pterosis. And what are your ideas and views on this, whether or not they are distinct species or whether they can actually be basically just different just different individuals of Pterosis, basically looking slightly different than your average Pterosis.
Right. Well, I'll say that Pterosis proper is from a slightly older unit. It's from the Old Man Formation, which is below the Dinosaur Park. I will say that there is work in progress, work that might see the light of day later this year, if all goes well, that argues for this to be its own distinct species. And in fact, that's been argued since actually, I think as far back as the Nanotyrannus paper, I think may have been the first mention of the possibility of the Dinosaur Park Formation Daspletosaurus being a distinct species. And so there are some traits that do make it look different, and we're just going to have to wait and see. It is, contingent on the people who propose it to give sufficient evidence to say that this is distinct from Horneri and from Pterosis. That said, species concepts are tough in modern animals, much less for fossils. And it all depends on how wide how fine you set your calibration on your speciesometer. I think there is nothing wrong with calling all three Pterosis. And it would be hard to demonstrate that's incorrect. On the other hand, if you set it on a sort of a finer calibration, that calling it a succession of species would probably be fine as well. So, it sort of depends upon whether you've calibrated it in Greg Paul fashion or Bob Bacher fashion as to whether you're going to lump it all together or split it all up. And it's not that it would be very difficult to demonstrate that either hypothesis is necessarily wrong. And all you have to do is look at, say, the literature on Pleistocene horses of North America, and you'll find out that they've got thousands of specimens and do not agree on how many species there are side by side and which specimens go in which species. So, so I will say, I do understand that that some people look at the Dinosaur Park specimen of Daspletosaurus and consider it distinct, and we will have to see if, when they present their case, if the features that they use to support that are sufficient in the eyes of the community to see if we actually agree, or just say you guys are splitting hairs. This is still Pterosis.
That's very interesting indeed. I've been on this for quite a while, actually, so I was really curious when we might hopefully get the publication, but let's hope for sooner than later.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. And speaking of the Daspletosaurans as well, where would you expect the newly discovered and described Thanatotheristis degratorum end up as a result? Would we possibly be looking at still a distinct taxon within the family, or would we be looking at just another Daspletosaurus, maybe Daspletosaurus degratorum?
Right.
So where's that going?
Yeah, exactly. And there's, as you know, and for those people who haven't, you could take a look at it. There's very limited material for this supposed new taxon. And when you have a situation like that, that's always a bit chancy, naming it a new taxon, because it might fall within the variation when we have better sample size. So I could easily envision it winding up as its own distinct species of Daspletosaurus, as indeed is actually justifiable in that paper. I mean, in their phylogeny, all you have to do is move Daspletosaurus down one node, which is certainly justifiable, and it would be another species of Daspletosaurus. So
we could end up with 4 species of Daspletosaurus, or we could end up with 3, maybe.
Right.
Ish.
Exactly. And, this is sort of paralleling what we're seeing in the contemporary hadrosaurs and ceratopsids, for whom we have generally much better sample size. And it looks like most dinosaur species hung around for less than 1 million years, maybe just a few hundreds of thousands of years. And so given that when we talk about stuff from in the western interior of North America, we're talking about 14 million years of Earth history. If a species only lasts for 500,000 years in one lineage, that's got me that we got a lot of species in order to fill up that lineage over time. So it shouldn't be tremendously surprising that we may be finding lots of new species that are just slight variants of the others if we're actually seeing them in succession.
I cannot agree more. It only looks very simple on the paper and looks like it's not a lot, but when you actually put it in a retrospect, millions of years is quite a long time. So, and I wanted to, obviously, first of all, I wanted to ask Greg if it's okay if I just finish all of my questions, since I will have to pop out and do work.
Go for it. If you want to get yourself done, then knock yourself out, dude.
After I'm finished, I'll probably have to shoot afterwards. So I appreciate everyone else's patience. So
hey, no worries. My audience is loving hearing you guys talk and learning at the same time.
I'm loving to listen to Dr. Thom, so I'm just going to give him some more reasons to talk shortly.
Yeah, Dr. Holtz is that kind of guy, yeah.
Yes, indeed. So one other thing, now I wanted to, since I don't, oh yes, there's one last thing about Tyrannosaurids. Now, I was wondering if you've heard whether or not there were any more details about Tyrannosaurid remains discovered in the Udurchukan Formation in the eastern part of Russia, which is where very close to time period, kind of borderline close, I would say, to Tarbosaurus, because it's in the proximity of the area, but it hasn't been positively identified as Tarbosaurus because most of the things that are known are pieces of bone, very fragmentary, and teeth, basically. Have you heard of anything that might shed more light, or any works being done in that area to understand if there may be a Russian Tyrannosaurid?
Right, I haven't heard any specifics yet. It would be utterly unsurprising to find something else that isn't Tarbosaurus, and maybe not Zhucheng Tyrannus either, that's in the far east of Russia, particularly because some of those formations are even younger than the Nemegt formation, and in fact have some of the youngest dinosaurs outside of birds in Asia. Some of these are much closer in time to the Hell Creek, so that the idea of finding either a new genus or, not impossible, Tyrannosaurus itself, Tyrannosaurus siberiensis or something, as a possibility, Tyrannosaurus amurensis could well be around over there, since the closest relatives in most analyses, at least, to Tyrannosaurus are the big East Asian forms, the Central Asian forms, Zhucheng Tyrannus and Tarbosaurus. So it could well be that the genus Tyrannosaurus gets its start over in Asia, makes its way over Beringia, and then arrives in North America in the late Maastrichtian. So all that's a long way of saying we don't have the material yet, at least not in detail descriptions. And to my knowledge, not a whole lot has been found yet, but it's there. There's enough to show that there are big tyrannosaurs in these formations. And so, yeah, really looking forward to seeing those show up, who is eating Allura Titan and so forth. And that'll be very cool to see whenever it actually is described.
This is the reason why I bring this up is, well, first of all, to answer the comment in the chat, which basically brings up if there has been any material or video material precisely done. I have actually done a video about the paperwork that describes the hadrosaurids from that formation, and it also cites tyrannosaurids, which is where I got the info from, and it also cites, surprise and interesting as well for me, to find out another saurid, which may be a first proper Russian, well, not Russian, just generally Eurasian on the eastern side of things, saurid, because we usually see the ankylosaurids over there. So that would be quite interesting to find out if there's more stuff to it. And since you are at it, if you want to know more about me talking about that paper, subscribe to AKRX channel. Now, moving to the next question. So, and thank you very much for that one as well, Dr. Holtz.
Sure.
So Now let's move on to other more general theropod questions away from Tyrannosaurids. They've been getting a bit too much spotlight as of late, so we want to give some others some love. And the next group I wanted to give some love, and they are my kind of second or maybe like close to first, along with Tyrannosaurid family. It's just the general Allosauroid family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wanted to ask, you know how we have a case for anagenesis on the Daspletosaurus species? Now, can we make a similar case, and is there enough ground, you know, enough premises to make a case for Giganotosaurus carolini and Mapiosaurus rosei being anagenesis? And what do you think we need to, what conditions do you think we need to fulfill in order to be able to make that case?
Right, yeah, so it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. They are quite similar to each other. Some of the things that we would need to show that, you know, Mapusaurus is a, you know, direct lineal descendant for Giganotosaurus would be, first of all, that phylogenies keep on finding them as sister taxa to the exclusion of all other Carcharodontosaurs. I know we might Tyrannotitan might be of concern because it's also in sort of that same general time and place. And certainly if we found either of those closer to Carcharodontosaurus than they are to anergenetic series. So that would be one, is to make sure that they come out as sister taxa. Two, that they don't overlap in time. Well, we've already fulfilled that, but if they continue to not overlap in time, that would be good. And especially if we begin to find something in between, you know, stratigraphically in between, that shows intermediate morphologies. You know, we have something similar in Triceratops history, where we've got classic Triceratops horridus in the lower Hell Creek, and we've got Triceratops prorsus in the upper Hell Creek, but there are specimens in sort of the mid Hell Creek that seem to show intermediate morphologies between horridus and prorsus, and that helps strengthen the idea that we're seeing a continuous evolutionary series there. And people have even argued that this Eotriceratops zero insulensis, which is below the Hell Creek in the upper Horseshoe Canyon, might actually be part of this whole series as well. And so, you know, filling in the gaps, having a, you know, continuity in time and place, those are all things that would strengthen the argument that you're dealing with a particular evolutionary lineage.
That's really fascinating. And this is actually another thing that I haven't considered, that when we have Tyrannotitan, which actually predates Giganotosaurus as well, but it's poorly known and understood in comparison. And to be fair, Giganotosaurus is also known from just one proper holotype specimen. So we have better preservations of Mapiosaurus, which shout out as well to your colleague, Dr. Philip Curie, who described, I believe, the Mapiosaurus rosei. And he also highlighted when he was on my channel as a guest a couple of years back, he highlighted just the difficulty of how to make that case. It's not really as simple as it is. And hello, Kat.
Yep,
so,
this is Inky.
Hello, Inky. Hello, Inky. How are you?
There she is.
I like cats as well, by the way. So it's almost reminiscent of how the Godfather film was made. If you've heard that story, that Marlon Brando, by accident, he saw the cat that walked in. It was meant to be on the set. So he picked it up and he improvised as if it was his cat. And it made it into the final cut of the movie. And that's how it kind of became iconic. So you're making the same sort of history here, Dr. Holtz.
There we go.
So now my next theropod question, and this will be my second to last question, actually.
Okay.
So it's to do with Megaraptoran family itself. And this is something that I find to be particularly underrated, that just doesn't get a lot of attention. There may be good reasons because they're not very well understood yet. And where do you see the whole story of them going in terms of where they might end up? So possible solutions: A, they stay either within Coelurosauria, B, they could end up in Allosauroidea, see they could end up somewhere completely different that nobody else has actually proposed yet. So what do you think?
Right. You know, a number of recent phylogenies has found them not merely as basal coelurosaurs, but actually in Tyrannosauroidea, to the point where I'm beginning to have to acknowledge that that is a real possibility. I would say they are almost certainly basal coelurosaurs of some sort. That it's becoming harder to justify them in Allosaurioidea. But, it would be really cool to find them at some totally unsuspected part of the tree. Simply because, finding things that are unsuspected is often really exciting. So, where that might be, something, below Allosauroids, megalosauroid style, which to be fair, for a short bit of time, Megaraptorans came out as megalosauroids. Around the first time they were discovered, or as a group. So, however, I think the current weight of the evidence is supporting them as basal coelurosaurs, and I'm beginning to grudgingly admit as tyrannosauroids. Although tyrannosauroids going in a very different direction than tyrannosaurids, which I will say, if that is where they wind up, that then becomes an interesting and an interesting story divergence. How from a set of tyrannosauroid ancestors, we would have one lineage that really emphasizes the forelimb as the weapon to acquire prey and even kill prey, with long, slender snouts and relatively small teeth, and the other lineage that reduces the forelimbs, that has these bone-crushing skulls, massive skulls, and evolves their cursorial adaptations and so forth. So that would be an interesting evolutionary story, how from a common ancestor we go into two very different modes of prey acquisition. But we will see. There's new work coming out on Megaraptorans as new specimens continue to show up. So looking forward to seeing what turns up with these guys.
I think the other part that might potentially be making the whole Tyrannosauroidea clade a bit more confusing is we also cannot just ignore the elephant in the room, that is the Proceratosaurids, that kind of share, in terms of the skeletals anyway, they're neither here nor there. They don't particularly have bigger heads like Tyrannosaurids. They don't also have particularly huge forelimbs like Megaraptorans that make them particularly to stand out. And there's also been a lot more of something like a dark area in between these families of what filled in and where they went in terms of the direction between when the first proper Tyrannosaurid came out and where exactly did it come out from. That's one of the things I was hoping that you could attempt to answer. But then again, I've asked many of your colleagues as well who are interested in this topic, and they all come to the conclusion we just don't have the evidence to test it. And what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think that's the proper answer right now. That the this lineage that includes true tyrannosaurids and other eutyrannosaurs, so Apalachosaurus and Pistachiaverser and Electrosaurus and so forth. We pick them up in the late early Cretaceous of Asia with things like Zhangguanlong, and in the early late Cretaceous of Western North America with Moros and Susquityrannus. So somewhere between those two regions is where it looks like they're first showing up. And those things are clearly closer to Tyrannosaurus and Albertosaurus than Megaraptor would be. So somewhere in the early Cretaceous, presumably in Asia, although who knows, maybe in North America as well, but presumably in Asia, I think is where we're going to find the ancestors of the T-Rex lineage. And then if Megaraptorans were part of this lineage as well, my suspicion is that we haven't really sampled the right specimens from Gondwana that were something like a Proceratosaurid to begin with, but we're down in that region and then started to emphasize the forelimb much more. But there's still a heck of a lot of dinosaur history that is just not really well sampled yet, and that will hopefully surprise us, because surprises are fun, but also hopefully inform us. So.
I agree, especially with the last sentence. Both the surprises, but informative surprises, are very welcome ones indeed. So, it's, at the end of the day, it's all information. It doesn't have any connotation to it other than just objective information and reality that we just want to find out. So, and I'm sure you as a scientist would be particularly thrilled if that were to happen. So now, and this is also makes it very interesting when you brought up the whole connection to Asia, that if we are to find out more evidence on that Russian Tyrannosaurid, then and we were to find a way to test and reliably maybe produce a conclusion, maybe a hypothesis, a working hypothesis maybe of some sort, that Tyrannosaurus rex also came from Tarbosaurus, then we could potentially end up with something of a case for cladogenesis. That means two Tyrannosaurus species of different species but of the same taxon came from Tarbosaurus and became two different species in different regions. So, and became contemporary because they kind of go extinct at the same time, long story short. So I would be very interested to see that, and would be very interested if you might find yourself be involved in something like that too, Dr. Holtz. What do you think about that?
Yes. Yeah, right, no, so, I think...
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Good.
Okay. So, yeah, because, it was a bit of a lagging connection, so we went on at the same time. So, last theropod-related questions, and that's probably going to be my last question as well for you today, is you would have probably noticed that there are some very interesting and strange things going on in terms of the dominant predation of prior to dinosaurs before they went extinct. And we're talking late Cretaceous, late Maastrichtian North America. Then if we look at late Maastrichtian Eurasia as well, and South America, we see quite an interesting sort of diversity of parts that are restricted to either... It's like there overall, of course, we have a very diverse range of animals from the groups, but there seem to be interesting sort of restriction for Abelisaurids to dominate certain parts and Tyrannosaurids to dominate certain parts. And then we have this very interesting Hatzegopteryx in Romania on a Hatek basin, on the Hatek Island, dominating that part. And I was wondering, how would you explain how we ended up basically in the places that just completely don't overlap with one another, provided that they didn't overlap, because we don't have the evidence that they overlapped. But what are your thoughts on how this ecosystem came to be?
Yeah. So it's and I would add there's another component, and that is Lamanna et al. In a paper that came out at the end of last year that looked at Megaraptorans, also showed it's beginning to look like in Gondwana, the Abelisaurids tend to dominate in, say, northern and central South America, and as far as we know, in latest Cretaceous Africa and India and Madagascar. But it looks like big Megaraptorans may have gone all the way up to the end of the Cretaceous without Abelisaurids nearby in southernmost South America and Australasia, and which would lead us to suspect that that's going to be the case for Antarctica too, but we don't have those specimens yet. So there's even a partitioning within Gondwana. And so what it sort of looks like is that up through the mid-Cretaceous, so late early and early late Cretaceous, there's still enough global connections that it's a rather homogenized world in terms of Carcharodontosaurids being the dominant forms, maybe some big Spinosaurids as rivals and so forth. And then we hit the mid part of the late Cretaceous, and in this shortish, 10, 15 million year interval for which we don't have very good sampling, a magic pixie comes around and waves a wand. Now, we don't know what happens. And something happens. And when we come out of that, the world is different. And the Carcharodontosaurs are almost all, if not entirely all, gone. The Spinosaurids seem to be almost all, if not entirely, gone. And in Gondwana, the Abelisaurs, who were already there, are now big and getting bigger. And in Asia America, the Tyrannosauroids, which were already there and medium-sized or small are now becoming giants. And what is it that changed? It's difficult to say. Is there an extinction event that we're not sampling because we're not close enough? It's noteworthy that there are some big large igneous provinces that occur in that interval, so maybe there is. But if so, it's not really showing up in the marine record. So, is it some sort of floral change? Is it out competition? Maybe the evolution of tyrannosaurids and maybe derived abelisaurids. Maybe they could outcompete the old forms. In North America, at least, we get the loss of the titanosaurs for a while. So that may have just wiped out the food base for the carcharodontosaurs. But why that should happen in South America, where the carcharodontosaurs were present, and the titanosaurs stay all the way through, but it's just really, it is the biggest transition in dinosaur history for which we don't have a good cause at the moment as to why the changes happen. Most other changes in terms of the overall faunal diversity of dinosaurs are typically associated with some other environmental factor we could test, maybe a mass extinction or a big volcanism or a period of intense rain or whatever. This one we don't have yet, hopefully. So, but yeah, and then when the dust settles, it basically looks like whoever was the second tier predator in that region has the opportunity to then take control as the apex predators. And in the north, that happened to have been tyrannosauroids, and in the south, that happened to have been the abelisaurids, and in other parts the megaraptorans. And on Hot Island, it looks like the pterosaurs looked around. There was no one else at the moment, and so hey, it's our job. Yeah, which is why Hot Island is it's weird. It's Transylvania, so of course it's always spooky.
Lives up to the reputation, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Of the Vlad Tepes. So we won't be surprised to see some, dwarf, because the island is famous for its dwarfism for different species, and specifically for some basal hadrosauroid attacks as well there, like the Telematosaurus and stuff. And you could see these different dinosaurs mounted on spikes, and then Hatzegopteryx has a signature all over that. So
that's right.
That will be the next thing to write about. So to add to what you said about Abelisaurus getting bigger, I'm sure you would have heard, and if you haven't, then lo and behold, that there is a Kenyan Abelisaurid which lived at the very end. That one, which was nicknamed, I believe, it's not formally assigned that name, that Titanovenator or something like that. And we don't have a proper description yet, but it's said to be anywhere from 9 to maybe 11-ish meters long. No estimates of mass, and I don't really know, there hasn't been any specific material to understand how much of the skeletal was actually there. So that would be something interesting to look out for as well. A big predator of Abelisaurids in Kenya would be amazing to see as well at the end of the Cretaceous.
Right. I've seen presentations from that fauna by the researchers who are working there. And unfortunately, at least the initial material, they're not mostly finding the specimens still in the ground that they can excavate. It's mostly bones that have been weathered out, and so it's in the float on the surface. But it means that the bones are there, and so they're trying to find more of it. And I know they've got titanosaurids from there as well, so not a surprise. And big chunks which are clearly abelisaurid and big. I mean, at least as big as Carnotaurus and possibly bigger. And so and it's from the very end of the Cretaceous. So we're beginning finally to know what continental Africa is like at that time. We've got continental Africa in the early late Cretaceous. We know pretty well, especially from the northern parts of Africa. But later parts of the late Cretaceous of Africa have been poorly explored, but they're beginning to be filled in, both in Egypt and some other parts Africa as well, and including now this stuff from Kenya, which will be a good thing to compare to rocks of almost the same age, a little older, over in Madagascar, where we do have a lot of fossils, and to see how they differ and how they're similar. Of course, Madagascar is historically, in terms of the geology, more associated with India than it was with Africa. India and Madagascar broke off as a unit and shared a little history, and then split off from each other. Yeah, so hopefully this Kenyan giant abelisaur will see the light of day in terms of enough detail so that it can be named and we can understand it better in the near future, I hope.
I hope if we find a good skull, we would have the specimen with a lot of horns. We just don't have enough theropods with horns, in my opinion.
This is true.
Prove me wrong. But anyways, I want to say that this is my time's up, unfortunately. I'll have to prepare some things for work as it's getting a little bit later here in the UK, in the London area. And I want to thank Dr. Thomas Holtz for answering my questions and providing very good talking points that are very noteworthy. Thank you very much, Dr. Holtz. And I wanted to thank once again Gregory for inviting me. And
My pleasure,
I wish everyone else to have a great session, and all the chat audience, please, by all means, spam with really good questions, and I'm sure
Yes.
Doctor will be happy to answer.
Bring on some good stuff, guys.
Bring on some
Yeah,
good stuff,
thanks for the
guys.
questions. They were great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I hope you guys have a great one, and take care. I'm out.
Sure,
and
okay, you
don't
have a
forget
good
to
rest of your
subscribe to the channel.
workday.
All right, bye-bye.
Right, and now that he's finally here, it's time for me to choose my final panelist, Mike Fredericks, the editor of the Prehistoric Times magazine. Howdy there, Mike.
Hi, guys. Dr. Holtz, I really have to apologize. I got confused on the time, and I've really enjoyed listening in on what I've heard so far, though.
Oh, good.
I was going to use that time to come up with some questions, too, so I think I might be doing more listening than asking today. But I'm enjoying what I've heard, and I know Greg always has a lot of questions from his listeners on the internet, too.
Yeah, this is the
Could I
first time
ask
I'm
a
doing
couple
this
questions,
live,
Greg?
Mike, so this is going to be interesting.
Are you ready to let me ask some?
All right, Mike, I think I'll let you have a turn since you've been waiting so patiently and all that.
I'll just ask one or two, and then you can ask them.
Yeah, okay, go for it, Mike.
Dr. Holtz, I know you remember when, I think it must have been your book publisher contacted me and said you were looking for some hollow toys that you had as a kid. We all did, but so I got those for you, and I was happy to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
But so my first question is, I mean, I'm nothing like Arlen. He was very scientific, so I'm going to be pretty much the popular questions here, you know.
Oh,
So
well, actually, before you ask the question, let's find out if we could actually do share screen, because share screen.
they're not there with you, are they?
They're not. I'm starting to share.
Oh.
I don't know if you guys are seeing it. We might not be seeing it, but maybe the people out in the.
No, I see.
Yeah. So this is the photograph that my that the editors for the for the book actually took of the toys that you managed to find. And in fact, those are the same make and model that I had as a kid. Although, if I remember correctly, I think I had a white. Is it a white Tyrannosaurus and a green Brontosaurus? But yeah, these are the same ones, and so that was extremely cool that you were able to find them so that I can include them in the book. And let me see if I could stop sharing. There we go.
So obviously, like many of us, you grew up as a kid loving dinosaurs. And were you able to not able to, but did you keep that interest all through school? Obviously, into college you did, and became a paleontologist. Is that how it was for you?
Yeah. So I was dinosaur obsessed as a little kid, and stuck with it from then on. So I'm the rare case of someone who makes a decision as to what their career was going to be when they were 3 and stuck with it. Actually, my initial decision I couldn't do because I wanted to be a dinosaur when I grew up, and my folks told me that wasn't going to be a possibility. So I decided I would do the next best thing. And actually, looking back, I think in the chat, Carol wanted to know what brought me into the world of paleo in the first place. So great minds think alike in terms of the questions. So so I a kid, I really was obsessed with dinosaurs, and so I figured I was going to study them. And so, all throughout school, I would, annoy teachers and classmates by, just talking about dinosaurs pretty much. And that went on, on through high school into college. So, it's not my only interest, obviously, but it's my main
Right.
one. And I really, I never did give up on it. I was, my family supported me with it. My wife supported me with the love of dinosaurs. She didn't say,
Very
"You're
cool.
weird," do something practical. She's laughing over there. She was a practical one anyway, so yeah, because she's
I'm
a
Mrs. Holt.
computer scientist, so yeah. And the so yeah, I was one of those people who decided to stick with it. And not everyone gets the same type of opportunity necessarily. They don't have that kind of support, or they need to do something else in their life. But anyone who likes dinosaurs can find some way to participate with it, whether it's being parts of online, going, even volunteering at local museums or nature centers, helping out with clubs and so forth. And if you're lucky enough, to be able to, volunteer at a museum and maybe, work on specimens or be able to go on a dig. Not all the discoveries are made by the professionals. A lot of discoveries are made by just amateur fossil
Sure.
collectors and so forth.
Yeah.
And additionally, a lot of museums will take on volunteers or paying volunteers to be part of the field crew for a summer. So you may want to check around. If people out online are interested in that, you could check around online and see, what museums or universities might be offering that as an opportunity.
Maybe start your own dinosaur magazine.
Yeah, or start your own dinosaur. Exactly, yeah.
So, Dr. Holt, what's a typical day in Maryland for you these days?
Oh, well, these days I get up, I have breakfast, and then I walk from the breakfast counter over here to work. But
That's right, huh?
yeah, these pandemic times, I haven't been going into to the office very much. But about once a week during the school year, and it's going to pick up during the summer a bit. But so yeah, a lot of what I do, since my paying job is as an educator, a lot of what I have to do is, well, during the school year, of course, is to prepare and deliver classes, to be available for student questions, to create and grade assignments, and so forth. And of course, to be on all the sorts of committee meetings that anyone in a bureaucracy has to be involved in.
Yeah.
But, when I have the time to do it, there's my own research to work on. So, data I've collected elsewhere that I can, try to synthesize, materials that I look up in the technical literature, even if I can't get to the labs to work on. We're collaborating with colleagues, getting them data. A big part of being a researcher is being a peer reviewer. So, getting papers through peer review, evaluating them, giving my comments on them. I'm also an editor, so I work as well. First of all, I'm the editor for the new series editor for the Life of the Past series by Indiana University Press.
Oh, sure.
So that's Jim Farlow did that for several decades. He helped create that series, and then when he stepped down, I took over. So on that level, I'm a series editor, but I'm also specifically one of the volume editors for the third edition of The Complete Dinosaurs. So in that matter, in that issue, or in that situation, we have been soliciting chapters, editing chapters, sending them out for review, getting the reviews, editing them, trying to come up with cover art decisions, things of that nature. So we're trying to press on with that. Hopefully it will be a 2022 book, but we will see as we get the stuff together. These things obviously, they always take longer than you plan, and in a pandemic year, it takes even longer. And some people might think, well, in the pandemic year, you're not going out in the field, so why can't you do devote more time to writing and reading, and to some extent that's true. But on the other hand, also, and to anyone out there else who's been doing teaching during this interval, all teaching takes like 2 to 3 times longer when we're doing it in the online environment. I don't know exactly why it is, but it does. And so it's we all had to work harder in this situation, regardless of what field we're in. And so it's going along though, so we're getting there. So those are some of the things that I would do. Although one thing that's sort of convenient in its own way is that working from home, by and large, means that I don't have to put all the main errands off onto the weekend or onto the hours when I'm, commuting home. Right. And I'm not commuting. That's another nice advantage. So I'm able to get, a lot more errands I could do during the day because I'll be back here able to work pretty much right away. And so that's a very different way of working, and that's going to be sort of hard to get back to the old style, where I have to put all those things off to the weekend or whatever. So,
right. I read recently, and I don't have all the details, but they're saying now that Jurassic Park had it wrong. Surprise, surprise. But the dromaeosaurs were not pack hunters. And that's fine, but the reason that I read was they're saying just because they don't see it in many modern day animals. So they're saying, yeah. What would you say to that?
So yeah, there is some evidence, some footprint evidence that from East Asia, where we have multiple individuals of dromaeosaurs all moving in the same direction on the same bedding plane as an iguanodontian that's also moving in the same direction. Mm-hmm. And so that certainly, although there are other possible alternative explanations, that certainly is consistent with a model of at least some occasional groups of pack hunting or mobbing or whatever we want to call it in dromaeosaurs. It has been argued that the situation in the Cloverleaf Formation, which got everyone thinking about to begin with, of Deinonychus being a pack hunter on Tenontosaurus, that maybe those aren't actually pack hunting associations, that the number of dead Deinonychus might have been too high for a typical pack hunt. They can't normally take that level of damage. Although, I would add, if you were a mammal, and the reason that that's an important distinction is that dinosaurs probably had a much higher rate of replacement than mammals do, simply because they can lay a lot of eggs every year, regardless of body size. And so it might be that dinosaur ecosystems, were able to absorb a lot more fatalities and be viable than the comparable level in a mammalian community. So it's something that's worth considering. But showing actual group hunting or pack hunting is tough to do from a distance when you can't actually observe it. I will say I think those Asian trackways are pretty good evidence for it, at least on some occasions, for some species. So I wouldn't say that just because we see modern animals not doing it or not doing it that often isn't sufficient justification to.
Well, that was my argument too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, trace fossils are amazing.
Yeah.
One other thing, we interviewed Thomas Carr not too long ago, Dr. Carr, and we got to talking about the battling fossil, the Nanotyrannus versus the Ceratopsian. I don't even know if they've determined which kind it is yet. Mm-hmm. And he was saying he wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And it is such a fascinating fossil that surprised me, although I realized that since no scientist was involved with bringing it out of the ground, that a lot of good information was lost. But now I understand a museum is buying it.
Yes.
And it's going to, put it on display and everything. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm glad that the folks at the North Carolina State Museum at well, North Carolina Museum of Natural History. I can't remember the exact title of the museum, but it's the museum associated with North Carolina State University. That they put in a bid that was collected by the friends of the museum and the patrons of the museum, that will acquire the specimen and also be involved in actual new construction as well as research. So one of the things they're going to do is create a preparation lab that people can look into and watch them as they prepare this fossil, so that the patrons or the visitors to the museum can see the research being done,
like they did with Sue in Chicago.
Exactly, yeah. And so yeah, I'm very glad that they managed to get that specimen into a scientific into a museum where it'll be curated properly, studied properly. Thomas Carr has his particular, very strong opinion about private specimens, and I definitely understand his reasoning. Not merely for the problem of if something is collected sort of as a trophy rather than as a specimen, that people are going to fail to collect the relevant data, but also because by turning fossils into a commodity, it will then promote more of that. So once people start making money on doing it, it will encourage more people to make money in doing it, and thereby potentially reducing the number of specimens that are available to researchers as more people are trying to just buy them outright and sell them to the highest bidder. And that definitely is an extremely disturbing phenomenon as it happens. But since, as you say, this specimen is now in a collection, I don't have any qualms about working on it. I definitely want to study the specimen. It's got interesting features as far as we can tell. And hopefully we'll be able to get from the original landowner, see that people get the permission to go to that site to properly assess the geology there. Yes, some of that information was lost because we didn't have teams on the ground who necessarily were doing the right sampling at the time, but at least close enough to where it was quarried out that they can get a lot more of the relevant data. And because the fossils are cool as individual specimens, but the context is very important. And so, for instance, this idea that they died fighting, we don't know that. We know that they were found together, but you have to do a lot more than simply say they were found together in order to assess that they were actually fighting each other. And part of it's going to depend on the state of both of the corpses. Does one show more exposure than the other, or are they the same level of preservation? What did the sediments look like there? If the sediments showed that there was a strong current flow, that probably suggests that they were both transported downstream and probably just wedged up against the log together. So we don't know what those answers are yet because those studies haven't been done. So we will see.
Yes, very good. Just one more question. I'll let Greg take over, but this is kind of a general question. We hear so many things that change our minds about paleontology and dinosaurs. However much you want to say, but what do we know about Tyrannosaurus Rex now, and what have we got wrong?
Well, let's see. Well, we know a lot more about T-Rex than we know about most dinosaurs, because it's so awesome. No, because
exactly.
Because of its awesomeness. I'll say that because of its awesomeness, it has attracted a lot of research attention. And thereby, people have done studies on it that they haven't done on a lot of other species, which they could easily do and indeed should do eventually, in terms of growth series and changes during growth, in terms of bone texture, in terms of biomechanics and so forth. We need a bigger database of all these for all types of dinosaurs. It can't all just be T-Rex. In fact, I'll go one step further. There's a a tendency for people who come up with a new method of analysis, whether it's, an aspect of ecology or biomechanics or something, to do this type of study on Tyrannosaurus, but then don't follow it up by doing the study on something where we actually know the answers. Can you take the sort of biomechanical models they look at with Tyrannosaur locomotion and reproduce the locomotion of modern animals? And they just don't do that. And the drawback with that is that means we can't trust the results from those studies. They might be correct. The logic behind the arguments are often very good, and they might be correct, but we can't tell that they're correct, and we can't tell how correct they are, what the size of the error bars are, until we see them replicate those results on something where we actually know the answer. So we need to see more people doing that. So like there was this recent study out on populations of Tyrannosaurus, and finding about, say, 20-some thousand individuals living at any given time, and that over the duration of its species there were a couple of 2 billion or something. If you go, 2 billion T-Rex, it's like, yeah, and if I were to ask you how many lions have there ever been, I wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. No one would know. These numbers, it's a cool number, but as I say, comparable. Cannot compare it to anything because we don't have those numbers for other things. And unfortunately, there's a tendency to do that with Tyrannosaurus especially. But we know a lot about it. I mean, we know more about its bite force, its growth, its anatomy. There have been detailed studies of pretty much every bone from multiple angles and so forth. We know its brain case, it's really, really well. But we still don't know, all the details of its growth series. There are really young individuals. We don't know their anatomy that well. The late adolescent phase, we don't know that well. There are some specimens that can help inform that, but we don't know them as well. The variation through time, now there are people who are looking at this, but let's sort of spread the specimens out over the stratigraphy. And is it all the same species from the beginning to end, or might we justify a series of species? And in order to do that, we need to really place each specimen into its proper level in the history of the Hell Creek. And unfortunately, specimens that were collected sort of early in the history of paleontology, people didn't necessarily have as good records of where exactly in the levels of the formation it was found. So some people are trying to go back and find the original sites, and so you can put those into the right context. Because we know, for instance, that Triceratops evolves during that time from one species to another, and it looks like Pachycephalosaurus does the same thing during that interval. So it wouldn't be surprising to get 2 or 3 successive species of Tyrannosaurus. That might not all be T-Rex, but you have to actually, first of all, show that there are differences between the individuals, which there are, but show what are the differences and if they stack up over time. Because if they're just randomly distributed throughout there, then, it's just one variable species. But if there's like one set of variables that are early and another set that are middle and another set that are late, that's good evidence of, a series of species through time.
Dr. Curry was talking about tyrannosaurs that were pack hunting also. So that kind of goes to both my questions there.
Yeah. And so, there is a question as to what degree tyrannosaurs might have been pack hunters. And at the sort of beginning, we talked about this a bit, but it's worth revisiting that there are a couple of cases where we have multiple individuals of the same species of tyrannosaur found in the same site. And Curry, in fact, is responsible for describing a couple of these localities, which is suggestive of a group. But we do have to remember that we have situations like, crocodiles, which will group together and feed, but they don't necessarily operate as a group, or Komodo dragons that will mob something, but don't organize as a particular family group per se. So we have to recognize these as other possibilities, even if, it could also be that they were family groups operating over time. And so, what we need are more cases of it. Good footprint evidence would be nice. of multiple age groups of T-Rex moving together, or other tyrannosaurs moving together. Um, and yeah, so these could help us, sort out, are they actually pack hunters, or were they mobbing, or is this a rare, post-death assemblage?
Thanks so much, Dr. Holtz. I'll let Greg take over. I really enjoy it.
Great, thanks.
Yes, indeed. We've got some more people coming on here that may have some questions, but I've got some here in the
Okay.
meantime. I've got one about
Sure.
Sarcophagus that's been on my mind for a while now.
Sure.
All right. My question is, has there been any new fossil material Sarcophagus max has been discovered in recent years? And if so, would this lead credence to it being a distinct genus or just another larger species of Allosaurus?
Yeah, that's, the questions about around Saurophagonax, this giant allosaurid from Oklahoma in the Morrison, haven't been answered. I know there are some researchers who do want to try addressing some of it. To answer the first question first, to my knowledge, no new specimens have been found. And to my knowledge, no one's really been working Stovall's old quarries from Oklahoma in order to test that. I don't even know if those quarries are accessible these days. That's a good question. I know that there are plans to look at the histology, so the bone structure, the microbone structure of the original specimens in greater detail, in order to assess, is it a fully grown individual, and so forth. That could help us sort things out, and put it in the context of other allosaurs. The possibility does exist that it is simply what Allosaurus fragilis looks like as a fully adult individual, that many specimens of Allosaurus that are on display are not histologically mature. So maybe Saurophagonax is just a very old Allosaurus. And although that seems weird, it's not without precedence. I mean, the Smithsonian specimen of Diplodocus, which for a long time was thought to be like the classic Diplodocus, is not a fully grown individual. It is the same species. So Diplodocus hallorum, what used to be Seismosaurus, as Seismosaurus. So it's definitely not a fully grown individual. Actually, one thing I like to point out is that in the Smithsonian's dinosaur halls, or the paleo halls now, other than their T-Rex, almost none of the individuals they have on display are adults. They're almost all subadults. So it's a weird situation. We definitely know that there are older individuals of Ceratosaurus and Stegosaurus and Edmontosaurus and so forth, Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, etc. So yeah, it's a lot of good questions about Saurophagonax, some that will be addressable when the original specimen is restudied, but also, I think people going to that old quarry and digging around, trying to find more. And definitely, I don't know of any other comparable individual found elsewhere. I know there have been some very large specimens of Allosaurus found elsewhere, but not at that quarry. And, this is worth noting, there is a paper that came out about this time last year, it was June of last year, by Stephanie Drumheller and colleagues, looking at the Mygat Moor quarry in Colorado, and bite marks on bones. They did note that some of the theropod tooth scratches, were far larger than the others, and they suggest that this is a Saurophagonax, or Saurophagonax-sized individual at least, feeding on the bones.
That is definitely interesting there, Dr. Holtz, and, well, we'll see what the evidence tells us in good time, of course.
Sure, exactly.
As I always do say. I had another interesting question here that I saw from your wiki bio. Can you tell us a little bit about your research regarding the monophyletic Carnosauria?
Sure. So, the back in the days, in the long ago times, the initial round of studies of phylogenetics for dinosaurs were concerned with basically two questions: where do dinosaurs fit in among archosaurs, and where do birds fit in among dinosaurs? And those were basically the only two questions that were being assessed. And people didn't really care so much at the time about the in-group relationships among the various types of dinosaurs. And that's fine, because back then, computation speeds were so slow compared to today that it took a long time to do a study with, a couple dozen anatomical traits and, 12 species. So, but as the methods improved, some of us, and sort of this next round that was in there, started to look at more detailed questions in there. And one question had been, to what degree are the various large-bodied theropods related to each other relative to small-bodied forms? And the results I came out with, and other people were coming out with similar ones at the same time, were that tyrannosaurs were not close to Allosaurus at all, that they were in fact coelurosaurs grown huge, which was an idea that had been put forth in the 1920s, but really had been downplayed since the 1940s onward. But in fact, that's what we've now confirmed, that tyrannosaurs are part of Coelurosauria. But that there is a clade of things that are closer to Allosaurus than to everything else. And so I and others have argued that the old name Carnosauria, which initially meant that the Allosaurus group should be maintained. Some people just refer to that as Allosauroidea, and exactly, people disagree on the specific definition, so I would use Allosauroidea as a node, so a group within this larger Carnosauria. Some people like Allosauroidea as the whole branch. But so yeah, this group that includes Allosaurids, so Allosaurus and Saurophaganax, but also the earlier branching forms of the Metriacanthosaurs that we used to call Spinosaurids, so Metriacanthosaurus and not Spinosaurids, Signraptorids. So Signraptor, Metriacanthosaurus, Yangchuanosaurus, and some others. Then also Carcharodontosaurids and the Neovenatorids. In fact, I was not the very first, but among the first to get Neovenator into one of these analyses. And it does look like that those four together do form a clade exclusive of all other theropods.
That is very, very fascinating, Dr. Holtz, and thanks for the explanation there. I have this other one from one of my Primitive War team members, Ane Singh. He's asking, do you have any knowledge of any upcoming papers regarding prehistoric coloration that you're allowed to speak of publicly?
I don't know of what the latest has been, what might be coming out on prehistoric coloration. I know there's been a lot of research recently on a number of different issues, and we've seen stuff with Anchiornis, with Sinosauropteryx, with Psittacosaurus, with Borealopelta, and possibly some others that I'm forgetting at the moment. And then the arguments by some people back and forth as to whether we can trust this work at looking at the shapes of these melanosomes, these paint-bearing or pigment-bearing structures within the tissues, if they really are as faithful markers of body colors as some people have suggested. I'm not enough of a molecular biologist to say which of those arguments are stronger. So there's been a lot of work on that aspect of it. It is worth noting that pigmentation like that, the melanin group, that is an aspect of color, but it's not the only aspect of color. And there are other types of pigments which might not preserve as well in the fossil record, but maybe some really clever geochemist will figure out a way of testing for them. And there are also structural colors, ways that feathers or scales or so forth are arranged in terms of their microscopic properties that affect light when it bounces through it and give color. So that even if these melanin pigments are giving us a faithful record of the colors of the various parts of those dinosaurs, it's not the entire story of what they looked like. So we know more about what they looked like on the outside than we ever did before, but there's still a whole lot we need to learn about. Yeah, and so there may be more of this. I'm sure there are more researchers who are continuing to look into this. I just don't know what the results are going to be.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dr. Holtz, for your answer. Chris is going to be heading out. He says, thank you for thanking me for including the chat and thanking you for answering his questions, hoping expanding his mind on what he could do with his YouTube channel and all that. So, hey, anytime, Chris. Anytime, my dude.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question comes to me from another of my fellow Permanent team members, Emily Stepp here. It's one about filaments.
Oh, okay.
What are your personal opinions on if monofilaments could have been ancestral to all of Dinosaur and potentially to Eva Metatarsalia under the assumption that dinosaur fuzz and pterosaur fuzz, pycnofibers, were homologous?
Right. Yeah. I will say that I actually have a paper that I've been working on. I presented results of it before, where I look at the this question and doing ancestral character state analysis using this, and that last question is the big one. Are what pterosaurs have and dinosaurs have homologous? And that's assuming pterosaurs have it. They did. I just had to say that out loud because there has been a paper by, indeed, some of the researchers who first has gone back to their old and said, no, we were wrong all along. Those are just collagen fibers that are fraying. And so pterosaurs weren't fuzzy at all, at which point everyone else stopped and sort of stared at them with their jaws open because A, these were people who were advocating for fuzz before, and B, their only frayed collagen fibers story is something we heard in the early days of people denying dinosaurs having fuzz. So it's strange to hear. Maybe these people are right. Maybe it is that those pterosaurs weren't fuzzy, but I think pterosaurs were fuzzy. And I agree with those people who argue that what we're seeing actually is true fuzz on pterosaurs. Well, if pterosaur fuzz and dinosaur fuzz is homologous, I would not be surprised. And I'm not a betting person. But if I were a betting person, that's what I would bet on. And that's because there's a lot of features shared by early pterosaurs and their close relatives, like Legherpetids, and early dinosaurs and their close relatives, like Lagasuchus, that are strongly suggestive of high metabolic rates. And this includes things like the rate at which the bone tissue grew and the sort of tissue it leaves behind. The size of the blood vessels that we could recover from the sectioning of bones. Extremely small body size with very long legs, very big leg muscles. A lot of features that are strongly suggestive of these animals having high metabolic rates. And if you're a small animal with a high metabolic rate, you have a big surface area to volume ratio, and that's a problem because all the effort you go through to warm your insides gets lost as it leaks to the outside because your huge surface area to volume. And so the way nature gets around that is coat you with some sort of fuzz, and mammals did that, and bees did that, and many moths and so forth did that. And it looks like both pterosaurs and dinosaurs did that, and they probably did that in a homologous situation. So I would say that is the likely answer, but I will say when you actually do the ancestral character state reconstruction, and you say that you reparameterize it so that you say we're not assuming that they're homologous, that they are separate from each other, then the ancestral state for Dinosauria as a whole becomes, it's unlikely that they were initially fuzzy. So there's a lot of additional information we need to really narrow this down, because it either goes, depending upon the parameters you use at the beginning, it becomes a dead certainty that the first dinosaurs were fuzzy to a pretty certain that they weren't. And, we would like to be able to narrow down between these two possibilities. I think another thing we're going to need are good, detailed work, as far as we can, given the state of the preservation, as to what the structures of pterosaurian pycnofibers and Dinosaurian fuzz look like, under a scanning electron microscope, and in terms of their chemical composition and so forth. And that will help us to narrow out if these are actually potentially homologs or not.
Awesome, thank you. I just gotta say thanks to everybody who dropped those files while we were talking. You guys are awesome. One of my fellow paleo artists, friends, Arm Papa Zion, wanted to know this: who are some of your favorite paleo artists, Dr. Holtz?
Oh wow. I am in awe of almost any artist. The ability to actually make pictures look good. It's just something that's beyond my capability. So, and I will say, if I start listing them, I apologize for those people I really, really like and I forgot to put on the list. But let's just start with, Greg Paul was really influential as a paleo artist as I was, coming up in the profession, and made dinosaurs look radically different than the way that earlier artists had done, like Charles R. Knight or Burian. Some people are going to be astonished I'm going to say this, but David Peters, who perhaps in later years has done some strange things with regard to paleo, but as an early paleo artist did some really excellent stuff. Mark Hallett, especially Henderson's pyramids are phenomenal. Let's see. So those are sort of the old guard. And there are others in that. Bob Walters as part of that sort of assemblage. And they all have their own different styles and so forth. Mike Skrapnek, don't forget him. And then we start to get, the advance of a new wave. So Louis Ray, and obviously, I've worked with Louis on my big book and so forth before. Far more vibrant colors and so forth. And then now there's just, Julius Cittoni. Let's see. Mind is blanking. Raven Amos, totally different art style. Zubin Duda, got great art. Again, totally different style. Let's see. Victor Rademacher, who's in fact came out with two entirely different art styles for the same set of papers of Alvarezsaurs in the night. So just telling you how one artist can do two totally different things. Let's see. Andre Atuchin, Gabriel Ugueto, Jorge Gonzalez. I'm forgetting lots of others.
I know quite a few of those names, man. I know.
Yeah. There's so many. And I apologize to those who I will wake up in the middle of the night.
I'm always
and say,
discovering more every day, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. There's a tremendous number of very talented artists from around the world who are doing wonderful things in terms of bringing these ancient creatures to life, and it's just really wonderful. And so it's not that there's room for lots of people to do that, especially, and this is now turning on to the educator part of the hat, especially for those people who want to explore different types of styles. Don't think about being the next fill in the blank. Think about being the first you.
Mm-hmm.
That it's good to learn from the way other artists have done in the past. It's good to study how they've approached situations. But be your own artist. Come up with your own way of telling the whatever story it is that you want to do. And I'll add sort of further with that. Your art is going to be wrong. Or rather, I'll say your art is going to be inaccurate. 100% of paleo art is inaccurate. We just don't know why it's inaccurate. Because if accuracy is 100% duplication of what the actual thing looked like, we simply have lost too much information. So we don't know. So don't violate what we actually do know. So, don't give Tyrannosaurus 5 fingers or something. But make good art. That's really the important thing. Yeah, you create something that's Brian Eng. Okay, there's another name. Make sure to get his name mentioned in there. Raoul Martin. Let's see. So yeah, there's plenty of wonderful artists out there. So.
So Scott had some more. Scott had a couple more questions he'd like to ask. Then I got one from the audience as well, from Sylvia.
Yeah, Dr. Holtz, I kind of want to get your general opinion on two things.
Mm-hmm.
One is the mysterious football-shaped egg from Antarctica. Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on the ecology of Tanistropheus, as much as it's gone back and forth?
Yeah. Okay. So for those who don't know about the mysterious Antarctic egg, last year it was published a soft-shelled egg from the late Cretaceous of Antarctica was published, and in the paper their conclusion was that this was a mosasaur egg, which seemed weird because we already had established that mosasaurs, at least some of them, had, like the other pelagic marine reptiles, retained the young in the body before giving birth in the water. And it turns out there are a couple marine sea snakes that actually do have an egg, like they lay a bit of an egg that then hatches out in the water. But there's been no evidence of that before with mosasaurs. And in this very same issue of Nature, another paper came out that showed that although we had traditionally interpreted the first dinosaurs as having hard-shelled crispy eggs, and that all dinosaurs had hard-shelled crispy eggs, they showed evidence that Protoceratops and a number of different branches of primitive sauropodomorph, of prosauropod like sauropodomorph, had soft-shelled eggs, had parchment eggs like typical turtles and lizards and snakes today, and not crispy eggs like birds and like crocodilia and so like some other dinosaurs had. And when they did their ancestral state reconstruction, they found the simplest solution, or rather, they found the most likely solution, which is actually distinct from the simplest solution, was that the ancestral dinosaur had a soft-shelled egg. And I would say from the simplest solution, that is the most parsimonious solution, is that it's ambiguous. It is equally likely, or you cannot use parsimony to choose between whether the first dinosaur had a crispy egg or whether it was a parchment egg. And so this threw all our traditional ideas about dinosaur eggs into like a state of chaos. And so the very real possibility is this egg from Antarctica could be a dinosaur egg. Now, it's not a titanosaur or a hadrosaurid, because those two, we know what their eggs look like, and they're crispy eggs. But maybe it could be a nodosaur egg. We don't have good eggs for the armored dinosaurs, and they would have been around in Antarctica. It could be from some other kind of early branching dinosaur. It presumably is not from. Oh, it could be an abelisaur. We don't know what their eggs are like, and they were or a megaraptoran. They could have been in their area. So yeah, it would have been so much better if there were some bones with that egg. So it is mysterious. The other question was Tanistropheus. I don't know. Yeah, I have not worked enough on Tanistrophiids. I still think that they make far more sense to me as being in the water than not. Those proportions are really weird, of this super long neck and this small body and these big hind feet and so forth. But, some people have advocated the shoreline, dabber into the water after fish. And I suppose that is possible as well. One thing that Tanistrophiids had that, or lacked, that plesiosaurs had, plesiosaurs and nothosaurs and so forth, is that in this Eosauropterygia, that's the group with plesiosaurs in their kin, they have a lot of neck vertebrae, and that gives them a lot more flexibility of the neck. But in Tanistrophiids, they have only a relatively few number of very long neck vertebrae, and that meant their necks weren't particularly flexible. And they are a puzzle. They're just weird.
Well, you look at Tanistrophius and it doesn't look very hydrodynamic. If it
No,
lived in the water, it was probably a poor swimmer at best.
Yeah. It certainly was not a pursuit predator in the water. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for answering my question.
Sure.
So, yeah, well, Sylvia was going to ask you, how much pain do you think paleoartists have been having lately with drawing Spinosaurus because of all the new discoveries regarding the anatomy of it?
Yeah. I famously, famously in the Twitter paleo community, tweeted out on the day that the Spinosaurus tail paper was going to come out to ask paleo artists to put the pens down until the paper came out later that day, because I knew that paper was coming. And so, yeah, I would say just be prepared whenever you're reconstructing a fossil organism, if it's not completely known, you're going to get parts of it wrong because someone's going to come out with a paper that shows you're totally wrong. It's just the nature of things. No one blames you. No one says, oh, you were bad for doing that. No, that's silly. You were doing the best you could with the knowledge you had. Plus, it gives you a chance to keep on revamping your art. I will say, however, I admit Spinosaurus, obviously I've done papers on it and so forth before. But there's so many other types of dinosaurs out there that need more attention, and maybe have even better skeletons. Sinraptor is known for much better skeletons than Spinosaurus is, and yet there's only a fraction of the number of Sinraptor art out there. And I know it's because it's really generic looking. It's like, draw me a super generic allosaur, and there it is. But we know what its skeleton looks like. We know what its proportions are. So, there's a lot of other creatures that need artist love.
Yeah, you definitely got that right. Not just dinosaurs, there are more than enough carnivores that don't have nearly enough attention done to them whatsoever, especially members of members of Panthera that are no longer around today, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Take Panthera tigers. Its ants, the ones that first appeared in the Sundaland region, P.T. siloensis, doesn't get nearly enough love and recognition for possibly being the largest tiger that existed. But it's known for very limited fossil material. I think for only like 7 skulls or something like that. So measurements have been pretty there and about, depending on the methodology used to derive the estimates for this big cat. So yeah, I've been commissioning some material to paleo art to bring some more awareness to this majestic, gentle gentleman, as Jim Corbett once described Panthera tigris. So yeah, that's going to be something I'll be looking into, of course. But okay, now onto dinosaurs. Followed on Tarbosaurus.
Okay.
Has there been any actual new tangible evidence on the Tarbosaurus Batar versus Tyrannosaurus Batar debate, i.e. Tarbosaurus being its own species genus, or it's just another Tyrannosaurus species?
Right. There is no such thing as a genus. Let's just remember this. There is no such thing as a genus. Genera are human constructs. So because of that, there is no objective way that we can assess if 2 closely related species are member of the same genus or not. And so ultimately becomes a matter of taste. And so it is equally legitimate to call it Tyrannosaurus batar or Tarbosaurus batar. They are, you're just moving the node down for Tyrannosaurus, up 1 or down 1, and they're perfectly equally legitimate. This is not a uniquely dinosaurian situation. I mean, people argue about the genus names of modern animals all the time. So this is something that we just recognize as part of taxonomy. I would say that for a while there, people were looking at the possibility that Daspletosaurus was closer to Tyrannosaurus than was Tarbosaurus, and in that case, that'd be a good reason to keep Tarbosaurus out of it. If we want to retain Daspletosaurus, want to keep our genera monophyletic at least. But given that it is likely the closest relative, it or Zhucheng tyrannus or the two of them together, that if you want to call them separate genera, that's fine. They are distinct. They have distinct attributes from each other. But it is also equally valid to call it Tyrannosaurus batatar.
So basically, personal preference for the time being, basically what you're saying.
Exactly. Here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a interesting answer. I still use Toposaurus that differentiated from Tyrannosaurus Rex myself.
Yeah, I know. I published in like one paper I actually used Tyrannosaurus batatar, but in all the other ones I used Tarbosaurus. And part of the reason was at the time it wasn't quite certain the interrelationships in there, so don't want to state as being true something that hadn't been demonstrated. And then since then, it is anatomically distinct, and the standard in most dinosaur paleontology is to keep few numbers of species in each genus, and so why not do that? Plus, it's a cool name. I like Tarbosaurus.
Yeah, that indeed. I just was reading the latest issue of Prehistoric Times, and the first article that came up naturally had led me wanted to ask you, what is your take on Dr. Greg Funston's research on baby tyrannosaur embryos and all that?
Oh yeah, that is extremely cool. I wish there were more well, he does too. There were more bones of these specimens, because it's just little bits and pieces. Give us a sense of how tiny these guys, or large, depending on your point of view, these things were. It looks like they could fit inside the largest theropod eggs, the largest non-avian theropod eggs, which are the ones currently known are the ones that are associated with Gigantoraptor and Babylon. And you just have to fold the little critter up, and it'll fit in these 3 to 4 liter egg. 3 to 4 liter eggs. And it shows how tiny they were, as they hatched. Actually, let me see if I can share this screen from the image from Funston's paper, or their press release. Oh, and that's right, I need to find the paper, or the image first, baby. Let's see. That's not it. Funston. There we go. Okay, so I got that there. And share screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. And so we've got, Greg Funston for scale, also a meter scale. And so the little blue there that's highlighted, that is a lower jaw that's known. And the little toe claw is what's known for this individual. And you can see how little these guys would have been compared to, well, first of all, an adult Albertosaurus or to a grown human male. So, they started little, but they didn't stay little.
Yeah, they certainly did not. They grew pretty fast once they started growing.
Yeah, indeed.
And then they peaked out as they got closer to maturation, all that. Mm-hmm. So that brings me back to an older question that may have possibly been revised in years past. About, now we're talking about, individuals and all that, like male versus female tyrannosaurs. Has there been anything new on that debate, on if males were larger or females were larger or vice versa?
Right. Well, we're still stuck with a situation that it is extremely difficult at the moment. In fact, no one has demonstrated that we can, sex erect, that we can tell which sex an individual Tyrannosaurus is, barring the presence of medullary bone. And we've got a couple individuals that have medullary bone, which is something that, as far as we know, is only produced in ovulating, and therefore female, archosaurs. And sadly, those two individuals of concern are sort of in the mid-size range. So people will talk about a robust morph and a gracile morph of Tyrannosaurids, but when you actually plot it out, we have sort of a continuous distribution. And so if we can't demonstrate dimorphism to forms, and instead have continuous distribution, then it becomes much tougher to be able to say that, first of all, that we've got definite evidence of the two different sexes, and that we could then therefore say that one individual belongs to one sex and the other another sex. So they probably had dimorphism. We just can't pull that signal out from what we have at the moment. And since we can't tell that, then we can't say that if the females are bigger or the males are bigger, or if they're the same size on average. So, things we would like to know, but we at the moment can't or don't.
Yeah, but just have to keep at it until science can advance to more conclusively answer this question here. Sylvia had two sets of questions here. First set is about Jack Horner's hypothesis about if you believe that Dracorex. Do you think Dracorex is a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus? That's part one. Part two is if he's asking if you were about Jack Horner's pet project concerning trying to resurrect dinosaurs from chicken and reactivating the old genes. The other question is about the Utah raptor block from Utah.
Okay, well, we'll start with the, well, I'll say Dracorex is unquestionably a juvenile. I've seen the specimen. I saw it early on. It has bone texture that is associated with juveniles. Now, one twist on the on Horner and Goodwin's initial hypothesis, where they had Dracorex was the juvenile, Stygimoloch was the intermediate, and Pachycephalosaurus, classic Pachycephalosaurus, was the adult. Work by Denver Fowler and also by Dave Evans and Goodwin as well joining in on this, have shown that the classic Stygimoloch morphology seems to occur only in the upper part of the Hell Creek, and the classic Pachycephalosaurus morphology only occurs lower in the Hell Creek. And so it looks like, granted with low sample sizes, it looks like that Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch are separate species. Stygi might actually be the descendant of Pachycephalosaurus, and in fact, we might wind up calling it, Pachycephalosaurus spinifer, rather than Stygimoloch spinifer. But Dracorex winds up being the juvenile form of either or both of those. So both of them look like it as a kid. So let's see that the Chickenosaurus project. I haven't heard. We first heard about that some years ago. I haven't heard about too much that's actually been productive with that research. So I don't know that it's actually been going anywhere. One set of work that I guess is associated with some degree by Dana Rashid has been looking at the formation of the pygostyle, which modern birds are distinct from many of the Mesozoic birds, or from many of the early types of long-tailed birds, in that the posterior tail vertebrae fuse up into a single bone called a pygostyle. And her work shows, first of all, that this fusion occurs after hatching in modern birds, which wasn't well known before that. And they've manipulated some embryos to show that they could sort of stop that fusion. Now, the general consensus of research ethics among experimental geneticists and morphologists is you don't allow the modified embryos to develop all the way to hatching or full term. That you sacrifice it, that's the euphemism, that you euthanize the specimen prior to it being born. So they didn't produce long-tailed chickens, but they might have been able to. And so that, as much as I know they've managed to do some of that work. I know there have been other teams. Botelho has been one of the authors on those, among others, who have been looking at other parts of modern bird anatomy and seeing about ways that you can arrest the transformation into the modern bird form, and it winds up letting you see something closer to the ancestral dinosaurian form in terms of like the structure of the metatarsus, or the development of the anterior process, or the ascending process of the astragalus, or some other particular bits of bony anatomy. But none of them are currently working, to my knowledge, to actually produce a chickenosaur, as it was called. And then you had another question that was coming up.
It was about, have you heard any news updates regarding the Utah raptor block from Utah?
Yes. I know they're proceeding with the preparation on that, and every so often Jim Kirkland or his colleagues will post photos of that. The really cool stuff with that is they've got really small individuals as well as full-sized individuals that are preserved together, that they've got parts of the anatomy that weren't known before. So when it's going to take a long time, it's a big block, they have to work through it slowly, but when they're done, we will know a heck of a lot more about the anatomy and the ontogeny of the largest of the raptors, which will be really cool.
Yeah,
and it doesn't, what is known of the big adult morph shows, it doesn't look simply like, Deinonychus on steroids, that when it was so big that it had changed in a lot of the proportions from what you see in a smaller dromaeosaur.
So, yeah, if anyone in the chat, Utah raptor was built more like a bear than a cat in terms of its anatomy.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful. Powerful bite, large size, 1,000-pound range, potentially speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to get on that bad side.
Absolutely.
Okay, here, can you... Alright, this is about research in general here. Can you tell us more about your overall research you've done with Tyrannosaurus and some of the discoveries you have made specifically regarding this group of theropod dinosaurs?
Okay, so what discoveries have I made with them? Well, with regard to Tyrannosauroids, I was one of the first to show cladistically that Tyrannosauroids were Coelurosaurs and not some sort of super allosaur, and made predictions, some of which panned out and some of which didn't, about what their ancestral states would be like. Let's see, I've worked on their locomotory anatomy and showed that Tyrannosaurids show more adaptations towards cursoriality, so running, than do other big theropods, and they share a lot of those same adaptations with ornithomimids, and it turns out they evolved it independently and not shared as I initially thought. Let's see, what are some? I worked on their ecology and their the ontogenetic niche shifts that tyrannosaurs undergo. As one of the first people to write about and publish on that. Let's see, feeding morphology and the use of torsion, so twisting in tyrannosaur feeding, with regard to the size of their roots, the bending properties of their teeth, and their solid palate of the mouth. Let's see, what are some of the other things? First, some of the first in-group, so within family phylogenies of tyrannosaurids. I worked on those, and a lot of this attributes that I recognized are still being used, although people have added a lot of new ones and a lot of new species in there. Let's see. I've done a lot of this. Some of the big summaries of their ecology and their anatomy I've worked on. Oh, and then the classic 2008 paper where I went through the arguments that had been given to suggest that tyrannosaurids were obligate scavengers. That is, they had to scavenge, that they couldn't kill, and sort of falsified each of them to show that, none of the proposed reasons why they had to be strictly scavengers held up. That's not to say they didn't scavenge. Of course they scavenged. Almost all carnivores scavenge, but that they weren't exclusively scavengers, as some had postulated. So those are some of my tyrannosaur works over the years.
Yes, and now that I'm thinking about how goes the work on publishing a new edition of that dinosaur encyclopedia that you and Louis Ray put out?
Right. So I've got a couple other projects that are coming out before then. I've got a kid's book on T-Rex that in the summer I'm doing my revisions on. I've got hard copy of the comments on it right over here. And so, as the semester has been now over, I can start to devote more time to that. I've got the third edition of the Complete Dinosaur to help finish up. But after those two projects are over, the revisions on the big book will be coming out. I will say this is something I can mention about it. In order to save page, to not increase the size too much, and that's an issue in publishing, is that you have to publish in sort of discrete units of size, because that's how you print them. We're probably going to lose all the sidebars by all the other authors to give me more space to add in new material, because there's so much I need to add, and there's new groups of dinosaurs I didn't talk about before. There's rearranged relationships. We want to actually address, when we wrote that, dinosaur color was something I specifically said that they had but we'll never know about, except no, we now know about it, at least to some degree. Got new things to say about eggs and babies, about dinosaur origins, about lots of different things in there that need to be added in. So yeah, we will be getting around to doing that. It's just not on the highest priority at the moment.
Whenever it does come out, I'll be one of the first to pick up a copy of the book then.
Excellent. Good.
Because I enjoyed the previous edition, of course, and I imagine a lot of people here in the chat have said the same thing. Okay, this question was Sylvia wants to ask you the same question he asked to Dr. Matthew Mossbrucker. Has there been any evidence found that raptors may have raised their chicks like ostriches and other such birds do? He was asking because there was a recently published paper saying that based on the raptor's teeth that the adults didn't feed their offspring or their chicks.
Right. That the young feed different food than the adults. So it is not out of the question that that dromaeosaurs raised their young, or indeed that all dinosaurs do. Indeed, crocodilians raise their young, at least for several weeks, if not months. And yet, baby crocodilians eat different food than the adults. Although the adults will occasionally provision them, they'll occasionally bring food to them. But what they don't do, what crocodilians don't do, is raise their young to adulthood. And I think if the isotopic studies for this are confirmed with additional ones and in other groups, what we may be seeing in a lot of dinosaurs is that they did raise their young to a certain age, but then the young were out on their own. And because dinosaur babies compared to adult size is a much bigger difference than we see in modern birds, that the young had to live differently in their ecosystems than the adults did. And this may be a pattern that in most groups of dinosaurs happened. In the case of birds age so rapidly that in the space of several months, you're a full-sized bird. And so if your parents were provisioning you your entire life, then you never had to ecologically be a different form. But if you're something like a crocodile, your parents may be feeding you when you're a little baby, but then when you're on your own, you're going after snails and little fish and so forth, until you can go after salamanders and turtles and small mammals and medium-sized mammals, and then eventually, antelope or whatever. And so that may be what's going on in a lot of dinosaurs as well, is that they were cared for early on, then they were off on their own and had to phase into different modes of ecology throughout their life.
Yep, that sounds about right. I would say Dr. Holtz. Mm-hmm. Sounds right. And has there been any actual evidence found for cannibalism amongst theropod dinosaurs?
Oh yes, definitely. We've got cases of the famous case of Majungasaurus, where we have bite marks where the pattern of the teeth matches the size and spacing of the teeth of Majungasaurus and no other carnivore from that island, from Madagascar, that are in spots on the bones of of other Majungasaurus that had to have been feeding marks, so like on the underside of vertebrae or the inside of ribs. So they can't possibly be fight marks, like the ones biting each other in the face or biting an arm or something. So it definitely had to be feeding marks from one Majungasaurus on another. And similar things have been found elsewhere. We have Tyrannosaur bite marks on other Tyrannosaurids that were feeding marks. In that particular case, because it's in the Dinosaur Park Formation, I think is where that specimen is from, there are 2 Tyrannosaurids there, so it could be cannibalism or it could be the other Tyrannosaurid eating, one Tyrannosaurid eating the other species. But there's this site, which I actually referenced earlier in this podcast, that Stephanie Drumheller and colleagues described at the Mygat Moor Quarry in Colorado, where there are bite marks of theropods on theropod bones. And when you map them out, some of them are definitely Ceratosaurus bite marks on Ceratosaurus bones and Allosaurus bite marks on Allosaurus bones. Now, you also find Allosaurus bite marks on Ceratosaurus bones and Ceratosaurus bite marks on Allosaurus bones. But it shows, at least in some cases, members of one species eating other members of its own species. So, yep, there definitely is cannibalism.
Yes, indeed. And in T-Rex, this also could be, bite marks on the head have also been interpreted as, signs of, establishing dominance, social hierarchy, and other things of that sort.
Right. Face bite marks are pretty common in theropods, but as you point out, that could be social behavior. That doesn't necessarily mean feeding. But so when you have them like on the inside of ribs, then yeah, they're definitely not just biting; they're feeding.
Yeah, and some of the bite marks on T-Rex have been pretty extraordinary. One had like a tooth stuck in its brain case, but it somehow managed to still survive after the fact.
Yeah.
It goes to show these animals were quite resilient to all manner of injuries that would have been fatal to, a mammal, for instance. I would do say myself, of course. Now, just think about Dinosuchus today for some reason. Now, I'm just thinking, what do you think the interspecific relationship that would have been like for Dinosuchus and the various tyrannosaurs that it coexisted with throughout its range?
Yeah, well, I think a good analogy would be like lions and crocodilus, that they could potentially be feeding on each other depending upon who got the jump on the other one. That it might be dangerous. It's it's a famous piece of paleo art, and I can't remember who did that. Is that a Raoul Martin one?
Yeah, I think it was Raoul Martin. Yes, it was on the cover of Dinosaur Art Volume 1, by the way, too.
That's right. That's the one. Yeah, of Dinosuchus lunging out at a tyrannosaur, and that wouldn't be surprised if that happened on occasion, and vice versa. Just as we see cases of, jaguars wading into the shallows, picking up a small caiman and walking off with it. That on the occasion a tyrannosaur would get in the water, see a tasty Dinosuchus, grab it, and walk off with it. Yeah, it's big predators will predate on each other when they get a chance, if they get a chance, and it's taking advantage of the situation is the important thing.
I seem to have read that there's been some evidence that Dinosuchus definitely did predate on tyrannosaurs based on bite marks found on some of their bones.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And in some parts of the range, the Dinosuchus was actually bigger than the Tyrannosaur competition, but in some parts that was the reverse, depending on the population.
Right, exactly.
And there's also been some debate about just how many different species of Dinosuchus there actually have been recently. I've been seeing some new papers on this creature, actually. What's your take on Dinosuchus' ever-changing classification and all that?
I don't know enough of the details of the arguments there, or rather, what is the actual range of variation in typical crocodilian species, either today or in the past, to see whether those are clearly distinct species or not. But it was widespread and it did live a long time, and so seeing different species in different regions would make sense. Seeing different species at different formations would also make sense stratigraphically. But yeah, it seemed to have been fairly widespread in North America in the late Cretaceous. So, both over here in the east and in the west and in the central parts of North America and so forth. So.
Yeah, Sylvia just submitted another question here asking what your thoughts were on Dr. David Holmes' articles positing that dinosaurs living in groups as juveniles and perhaps living more a solitary lifestyle when they became of adulthood.
Yeah, I think that's something we definitely have to consider. I think there was probably a lot of more, and this is generally accepted, a lot of mortality. Oh, there we go. That's the picture. In dinosaurs, they could get away with that by having this rapid rate of replacement. And so, I talked earlier about there seems to be a lot of evidence, a lot of dinosaurs that they would move together in these little pods of one hatching's worth, and just attrition is going to start taking them out over time, and they might wind up being more solitary. Of course, we definitely know that some were group living animals, but some were no doubt solitary as well.
Now, this question I don't know if I asked the first time, but it's regarding dinosaur limb pronation. How was it first discovered that dinosaur hands could not pronate like in the style of the Jurassic Park films and other such popular depictions of these animals?
Right. Well, actually, it's sort of the obvious thing when you think about it, looking at the bones. So putting them actually into proper articulation. And when you start seeing how the bones are arranged, especially, the ends of the radius and the ulna, and then the various wrist bones, you'll see when you get them there that you can't really show how they can be moved the ways ours can, with our various pivot points, to put the hands into the right sort of fashion and have the crossover, for instance, of the radius and ulna. That the way that the facets between them articulate with each other would keep them in sort of this position. And when we see the forms that can do this, it's not surprisingly in those groups we already knew were quadrupedal. So sauropod, close relatives, pterosaurids and their close relatives, and the big armored dinosaur. And pretty much everything else seems to have their hands, stuck in mostly this sort of mode.
Yeah, for the most part, though, some groups might have had some greater range of flexibility if they were using arms more efficient, like the Megaraptorans and Acrocathosaurus and some of those other ones definitely could have had a bit more range of flexibility. And their Xenosaurs, they were using their arms more fully for getting food and defense and all that.
Right, but there's still not that much, wrist action that they
Of
have.
course,
and you really need that at this point, because that's what we need in order to get the hand doing this, which is this. So in the case of these other things, you get a lot of finger action going on. That's true, and maybe some up and down wrist action in Therizinosaurs, but not this direction, and that's what you need if you're going to turn a hand into a foot.
True. Yeah. Yeah. Indeed, Doc. So just for on the pop culture side of things, as I figured, because why not? You like your monster movies like the rest of us, of course. How'd you enjoy Godzilla vs. Kong? Assuming you've seen it by now.
Oh yeah, we did watch it. We watched it the day it came out, of course. It was fun. There was a lot of fighting, and when you see a movie called Godzilla vs. Kong, you want to see the monsters fight. That's the main thing. I didn't like it as much as King of the Monsters. Or the 2014 Godzilla. I like both of those two better. I thought those were better done as movies and as stories. And those are sufficiently different from each other in terms of the type of story they're telling that it was good. I think Godzilla vs. Kong just some bits of it seemed off. And it was mostly the non-monster fighting sections. When the monsters were fighting, it was awesome.
I mean, those fights were not interrupted in the least. When Godzilla and Kong were slugging it out, you had their full attention. Yes, certainly.
Yeah, but I don't think the world building in King of the Monsters, I think, was a lot better, and was sort of consistent with what we had seen in 2014 and what we had seen in the Kong Skull Island. And then this last one, all sorts of stuff start getting pulled out of nowhere that just seemed weird. Also, I missed, Charles Dance. Was a much better villain. I would like to have seen more with him.
I would have liked to know
understand.
what became of him after King of the Monsters myself.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, some of it just seemed off to me as a story, and I don't know if I can really articulate what it was.
Well, some people probably could express it a little better, but I was actually
I-
pleasantly surprised by Mechagodzilla being in the film, of course.
Yeah, that was cool.
That was good that all of Toho's Big Five got to appear in the American Monsterverse trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought that they would bring all of them there. Martha, Rodan, Ghidorah, and yes, even Mecha G in the mix.
Yep.
That final sequence in Hong Kong with Mechagodzilla, like, he was acting like a Terminator pretty much, and that was by design.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I really dug the aggression level of Mecha G here in his connection to King Ghidorah as well.
Right.
In a sense, of course.
Right.
Which ties into a manga actually, which was done in the 90s of Godzilla vs. Godzilla 2. In the manga adaptation of that film, Mecha King Ghidorah's AI takes over Mechagodzilla and causes it to go berserk and just tries to kill Godzilla and going against the control of the human pilots.
Okay.
So there's some precedent for that.
Okay.
Though in this film, the severed head, aka Kevin,
Right.
yeah, the brain was used as the basis for its neurocomputer and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep, Kevin was actually much better as a Mecha G than he was as a Ghidorah head.
Fair enough.
So Silvio has some things here regarding, more stuff here.
Okay.
Alright, it's also saying Dr. Hohen also has mentioned in lectures that the fact that we don't see many young dinosaur fossils, despite the fact we see many egg fossils, he thinks because the majority, 80% were probably being eaten, assumed on that weren't predators going mostly after the youngsters here instead of going after adults?
Yeah, and Hone and Rauhut actually have published on that aspect before, and it just makes sense. If the young represent a lower anyway, let's face it, they're easier to beat up. It's easier to kill a kid than it is an adult. Let's face it, the dinosaurs aren't doing this for, to win, prize fight belts or anything. They're doing it to eat. So, if you could pick on a little kid versus go after a full-grown Triceratops, you go after the little kid. At least if you can catch it. There's actually some ecologists of predation point this out, that as the predator gets a certain size, you start losing smaller animals as potential prey because it's too difficult to get them, and they're not literally worth the effort. There's not enough energy that you're going to get.
Of course not, yes.
But in general, yeah, you don't want to go out there and do trophy hunting. You want to get a lunch. And there are advantages to going after large individuals if you can take them down, because that provides a lot of meat. But there's also advantages of going after little guys because, they don't fight back, or when they fight back, it doesn't matter. So yeah, sadly, and actually, this is some of the stuff I write about in the book for the kids' book for T-Rex that I've been working on. Is, it makes Tyrannosaurus sound like a bully, but just remember these are animals and they're doing animal things. They're not people, and so it really isn't being a bully if you're just trying to feed yourself. But yeah, so yeah, I'm sure the younger forms were getting fed upon a lot more than the adults. But that's not to say that they weren't going after adults. We definitely have evidence of big adult duckbills being bitten, big adult triceratops being bitten, large sauropods being bitten, and so forth. So
yeah, certainly. And if this was predator on predator, like if there are theropods living in groups, and like of a lawn pride, for example, if the dominant males of a predator ousted, then the newcomers will come and kill the offspring of the females that bring them into estrus and all that. So if there were any dinosaurs that adopted a similar sort of structure, and that also could be a thing too. But again, this is just pure speculation, of course.
Right, exactly, yeah.
I would put this would draw me a sword packs more than anything else. if there were any social groups, and if the Utah Raptor block bears any fruit, then they could possibly postulate that they could have been legit, social. Like
yeah,
that.
Yeah, that's true.
Definitely looking forward to see what they uncover from that block.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I think I've gone through all the questions I've possibly had for today,
Okay.
Doc.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm ready to wrap up if you are, sir.
Oh yeah, not a problem. There were a lot of good questions there.
All right, Silvio says he has a few more. Okay, Silvio, if you have a few more, then go ahead. Go ahead. We got a couple more questions there from one member of my audience. Yep. All right, so ask away, my dude. And again, thank you to everybody who dropped follows today and asked about their questions for the good doctor today. This experiment has proven to be, I would say, mostly successful today, of course. Doing it on Twitch like this. And chance for some of my streamer friends to get to know you.
Great, excellent.
And get introduced to the world that I live in a lot of the times of the year. Yep, the science world, the pop culture world of monsters and all that. When I'm not, going after ghosts and phasmophobia or anything else like that.
Right.
Yep, that's the thing I'm playing most of the time here when I'm not doing podcasts.
Okay, fair enough.
Still an early access game. Oh, speaking of video games, there are more than a few new dinosaur games out there in development right now. Some of which I've backed on Kickstarter, like Deathground, Goner, Prehistoric Kingdom. What are your thoughts on those sorts of dinosaur games and any other potential ones in development? If you could design your own dinosaur video game, what type of genre would it be in? What sort of mechanics would you put in there? And just, what would it be like?
Ooh. Yeah, I'm not much of a game designer, especially not a video game designer. So that's a good question as to what, I know people have already worked on these sorts before, and the ones that are sort of immersive environment ones, I think those would be cool, with lots of different dinosaurs. Although an alternative would be something where you're, perhaps where the goal is, it requires, whatever it is you need to accomplish, you have to travel throughout dinosaur history. You need a variety of different forms. Some sort of quest thing where you have to go from, the Hell Creek to the Morrison to the Cañadón Asfalto to the Cayenta or whatever, and maybe collect things all throughout. And that way you get to see a wider variety of environments and a wider variety of dinosaurs and so forth.
That would be pretty cool. I would agree. The ones on the list, the ones I'm looking forward to the most are Prehistoric Kingdom for just the attention to scientific accuracy and anatomical detail on the various prehistoric animals featured in that game, and being a spiritual successor to Operation Jurassic Book, Operation Genesis. And that one's got some very good designs, and they got some good artists working on that. And you got a chance to have a choice of either feathered or non-feathered T-Rex, and even one of the skins is actually a Tarbosaurus. So if people want Tarbosaurus in the block, well, they can have it.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Goner is another such game that definitely would be appealing to a lot of folks, I'd imagine. It's a first-person survival horror type game where you are stranded on an island that's chock full of dinosaurs from the late Cretaceous period and a hostile native tribe, and you don't evac. You're not a survivalist. You're not a soldier. You're just a regular guy, and you have to craft tools, craft weapons, and you have to feed yourself. Monitor your body temperature, and all that sort of stuff here. And the animals definitely are getting more better with the details and whatnot. Alright, before I get to Silvio's questions here, Scott was asking, are there still any valid arguments to make against the asteroid neck as being the cause of the KPG extinction event?
Yeah, I don't think there's any valid arguments against it. I think that one could find that there are potentially other contributors. The classic one being Deccan traps volcanism. But as people have modeled that in recent years, it looks like the scale of the Deccan traps wouldn't have been sufficient to have generated a big mass extinction, and certainly not the one that we saw. And in contrast, the more people have studied the details of the asteroid impact and its effects, the more devastating and catastrophic it looks. And so I think that the strong weight of the evidence is that without the asteroid impact, the KPG extinction, as we understand it, would not have taken place. That it's the big cause, and maybe essentially the sole cause, although we can't say anything is the sole cause in a world where there's always something going on.
All right, Sylvia's first question was about a Giganotosaurus.
Sure.
Do you think the extinction of this genus of cow-carrier dinosaur may have been due to, being over-specialized for hunting large prey items, like sauropods and the like, in a fashion not too dissimilar to one of the possible extinction causes for Megalodon, being just too specialized for big prey and not being able to adapt?
Well, the thing is, we've got other successive giant Carcharodontosaurids after it that were also good at eating big prey. So I can't say that the genus Giganotosaurus itself died out for that reason. However, I would argue that probably is the reason that, at least in some parts of their range, the Carcharodontosaurids as a whole died out, particularly in North America, because we lose the sauropods in North America for a while, and there are no more Carcharodontosaurs there where there had been before. And instead, we got a world where it's hadrosaurids and ceratopsids, these much smarter, well, not much is dumber than a sauropod, but much smarter than sauropods, complex social structures, much more nimble. Again, it's not hard to be more nimble than a sauropod, and so forth. And it might be that the Carcharodontosaurs would never have been able to compete with those, and you need something that was much better, and those are tyrannosaurs. So yeah, I think that's the that we can't say it for Giganotosaurus per se, but for the Carcharodontosaurids as a whole, I think that's quite reasonable.
So, have you seen the Jurassic World short film, The Battle at Big Rock, in which they actually fixed many of the anatomical flaws of the Allosaurus featured in Fallen Kingdom?
I have seen it, and it is a good model. It's apparently juicing on steroids or something, because it's quite large for Allosaurus. But anatomically, yeah, it looks much better than the earlier versions that they showed in the Jurassic series. So yeah, I was glad to see the way it looks. Nice.
So, now this one's about the Jurassic Park books. Have you read the original Jurassic Park novels from Michael Crichton? And if so, what do you think of the huge difference between the books and the films, and which do you like more, the films or the books?
Honest to goodness, the first movie, the original Jurassic Park novel is not bad. Crichton had some original ideas in there and so forth, but the first Jurassic Park movie, it might be a popcorn movie, but it's probably one of the best popcorn movies of all time. I mean, it was Spielberg really doing what he does best, and it holds up as a movie, today, even watching it. Even with regard to the special effects, it was the early days of CG, and yet they hold up better than actually some of the subsequent Jurassic Park movies, the later 90s ones, because he knew his limitations and he knew how to use them properly, and how to, when are you going to use animatronic models versus when are you actually going to use the CG. The acting is great in it, generally great. And yeah, it holds together really, really well as a movie. So I would definitely say I like the original Jurassic Park movie much better than the two Crichton novels. The Lost World had some nice bits in it. I will quote it on occasion. The third one, meh.
Yes.
It's okay. We got to see the animals, but that was cool. The Jurassic World was I thought a nice movie, and then when I found out my book is in the background for like half a second, it became one of the greatest pieces of cinema in history. Not that I'm like biased or anything. And as I like to point out, it is the only Jurassic Park movie where there's no paleontologist character, but where there is a paleontologist on screen, because Jack Horner is actually on screen in that movie in his non-bearded mode. So he's one of the he's along the raptor pen, running back and forth over there. He doesn't have any audible lines, but he's there.
Wow, I didn't even know that was him in that movie.
Yeah, he's there in the movie. And then the most recent one I don't hate it, but there's just so much more with it that they could have done, and I'm somewhat dreading the next one. And when the most recent one came out, people, these dinosaurs are going to overrun the world and so forth. And as an interview, it's no, not in movies, sure, but in reality, we're really, really good at killing things. And this would be unconstrained human activity against them on our habitat. And there's extremely small numbers of them. So yeah, these poor dinos are doomed in a realistic scenario.
Yeah, you got that right. When you've got anti-tank helicopters, drone missiles and all that stuff we've got today.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's it's not their habitat. It's not their ecosystem. So yeah, the poor things would have been doomed. But it's a movie, so they will hold their own at least for a
we'll have to see what happens when Dominion comes out. All right, Seville says, "What's your opinion on resurrecting the dodo bird now that its entire DNA has been sequenced?"
Yeah, well, let's see if we can clone a chicken first. We haven't done that yet. We haven't cloned a chicken. We haven't cloned any animal that lays a hard-shelled egg. Once we can do that, then we'll see about dodos. But yeah, no, that is actually something that we still haven't been able to accomplish yet. And so until we can get good at cloning animals for whom we actually, have the whole animal and so forth, their entire genome, we know their ontogeny, etc. Until we can do that well, it would be difficult to do it for a fossil or a subfossil in the case of dodo form. Down the line, maybe. And I think the people of Mauritius, the island of Mauritius, would love to have dodos back. In fact, they've sort of said, if possible, it would be wonderful for them, to make it the center of their tourism. It is the symbol of the islands there. It's probably the most famous thing about the island to the world at large. And, it's our fault that they're gone. So there's sort of also another ethical aspect to it. In ways that, sure, it'd be cool if we were capable of cloning and bringing back non-avian dinosaurs. Of course, I would love to see them. But it's not the same sort of imperative or sort of moral obligation of, if we have the capability of bringing back a creature, that it's our fault that they're gone and for which their habitat is still available. Then you got some questions. This is where you get, philosophers and ethicists in here. It's not merely scientists that are involved. If we could do something about it, are we obliged to? And maybe. But it's, at this point, it's moot.
So, what are your thoughts on the final scene in Fallen Kingdom with Maisie after she releases the dinosaurs, where she says, "Oh, I had to. They're alive, just like me." Was this a very?
Yeah.
Did you think this was a very powerful scene after we discovered that she's also, in fact, a clone herself?
Yes, that people argue back and forth about whether that was a good scene or not. I liked, I liked it. I liked what she said. I think that's what I would like to see explored more in the Jurassic Park movies, but they're not going to, because it's always going to be about dinosaurs. Is the fact, if you can clone this easily, there's a lot of implications for human society, vastly beyond making a amusement park for rich kids with extinct animals. And there's a whole world of other stuff that's much more significant than that. But it's not called Clone World; it's called Jurassic World, and so the dinosaurs are always going to be the focus of these movies. Because there's all sorts of questions about clones and clone rights if we bring them back, plus issues of other creatures. Would conservation be as strong if people who want to take over that land or hunt those animals say, "Oh, you can always bring them back. Look, you brought back these dinosaurs, so I should be allowed to kill all the elephants I want. I should be allowed to over harvest these fish, because later on you can bring all those fish back." And I think seeing something like that actually playing out the world that exists in a world where it's relatively easy to clone things is something that they haven't really thought as much about. And that's why I thought the storyline with Maisie was actually cool, because they were beginning to think about some of those implications. At least some of the script writers were. So
That is, I would definitely agree. That scene does raise a lot of philosophical more debate here now regarding cloning and all that stuff. And this goes on to another film that somebody else want to ask your thoughts of the first Land Before Time from 1988, a great classic from Don Bluth that helped to inspire many a paleontologist to become dinosaur aficionados. What are your thoughts on that first film? Any fond memories of it?
For me, it was out when I was an adult, so that's one that for my students, it definitely was an inspiration. But for me, it's like, oh, good, there's a kids' film with dinosaurs in it. So it's cute, and spawned various memes and things concerning tree stars. But yeah, and for a lot of like young people, it was their first real exposure to the varieties of dinosaurs. And the animals are talking, but animals are talking in pretty much all kids' films, so that's not a problem to me. So I'm glad it did inspire a lot of people, though, because it's good to be inspired by animals.
Yeah, this is a film that could have been a lot darker if they stuck closer to Don Bluth's original vision for that film, from what I've read on this. Like, there was like one rumor that the Great Valley was supposed to be like a representation of like heaven or something, and all the dinosaurs had actually died or something on their way there.
Oh wow!
Pretty morbid, I know, when you think about it, if they had gone with that approach. So somebody wants to know, who is your overall favorite character in the Jurassic Park, and he says, please not Malcolm. And so he says, I can't stand the guy.
No, definitely not Malcolm. Rexy is my favorite character, followed by Blue. No, okay, so kind of true, but if we limit it to human characters, I think it's sort of obvious that it would be Grant for me. He's going to be the one I sympathize with, professionally and so forth. But it's but yeah, not Malcolm. Malcolm's weird. Not that being weird is wrong, but he's a mathematician. That's weird. No, he's overabundance of personality. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm glad to see that some of the other initial characters will be coming back for the next one. So
Yep, the main four: Grant, Ellie,
Yep.
Malcolm. Yep, the whole family, pretty much,
Yep.
and Grant. So, all right, if someone new were to create a new Jurassic Park-esque story, what changes would you advise to bring these animal dinosaurs back? Maybe changing their DNA from frog to exchanging frog for bud DNA. And Malcolm, the book, is more addicted to the drugs, so I remember right.
Well, I would think what I would like to see, rather than just another iteration of Jurassic Park, is just another. If you want dinosaur movies, think of other stories to tell. Do a time machine movie. Do a new version of The Lost World, and by which I don't mean the Jurassic Park: The Lost World.
Conan Doyle style.
Yeah, exactly. Or At the Earth's Core, or
Pellucidar. Yes.
Gods. Yeah. So there's plenty of other stories people could do with humans.
Yes.
Sound of Thunder. There.
The Sound of Thunder. Exactly.
Would be good. Don't mention. Okay. Yes, they did do a movie.
Yes. How
Sound of
about one that's a little better than that, of course.
Yes. That was in name only. A Gun for Dinosaur was a classic.
Gun and Dinosaur. I heard about that.
Yeah.
What about a new adaptation of Dinotopia? If so, would you support that?
Yeah, I would like to see that, and getting again more people who actually know the anatomy of the animals involved. The old live-action version where they had the ankylosaur with the giant human molar, when in fact their teeth are smaller than ours, much smaller than ours.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would be cool. Because that's something that's obvious that it's all a fantasy. Valley of Guanji, there we go. That would be something that would be interesting.
That might be a hard sell to remaking a Ray Harryhausen dino film.
Yeah.
Might be a hard sell, in my opinion. And have you read any of the Dinotopia books yourself? And if so, do you have any favorites?
Ones I have, yeah, and I liked it. They were cute. Something that I would like to have seen, although it turns out in the Lost World, someone does mention this, but have a Lost World situation that's set in the 19th century, and so mid 19th century paleontologists wash up on an island or whatever, see these bizarre creatures. They have zero idea what they are, and eventually, when they find one that's dead and they see part of the face rotted away, the guy looks, this is iguanodon, not knowing that this big animal with a horse face and a spike thumb and so forth was iguanodon, because that's not how they envisioned it. But until they can actually see the teeth. So to show that these people would have no clue as to what those animals looked like, because they didn't have the knowledge yet, even though they knew about the existence of dinosaurs. So
there are some stories already being written out there that are telling things that are a tad different. Taking inspiration from games like Dino Crisis, where human technology and experimentation does something to bring dinosaurs back, through time and such.
Right.
So the about to mention something here that is doing just that. Experimental technology bringing dinosaurs back from their time to our time. The Primitive War series that Ethan Pettis is writing takes place in an alternative Cold War series. The Russians develop an experimental technology called a collider, which is a particle accelerator, which causes an accident, which opens up wormholes in the past, which bring forth dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals into our time. And as a result, well, Man vs. Dinosaur in the Vietnam War, Book 1. The current book that's out takes place Anglo Civil War, with another collider, more species coming out, and with even more stuff coming out. Very, very good series, and we've got more than a few paleo artist input on the creature designs for this series.
Oh, cool.
And I speak as I'm part of that creative team, by the way, too, for it.
Ah, cool.
Yep, fully feathered raptors, anatomically correct. Utah raptor is the main raptor type, along with Deinonychus as well. And yes, we also do have fully feathered tyrannosaurs, of course, but this manuscript was written like 2010, 2012, when it was more acceptable for a T-Rex to be feathered and such.
Sure.
If it had been written like nowadays, we would have definitely stuck to pure scaly Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Here we go. Let's see.
So yeah, definitely, if one's looking for a good, solid dinosaur story that's close enough, that's like a spiritual successor to Jurassic Park, but also becoming very much its own rapidly growing property, Primitive War, I cannot recommend enough.
There we go.
Yeah, we even got supplementary material like two bestiaries, a bestiary 1 that's already been published, a second one in development right now. There's a comic series that's being developed that's being adapted from the very first book. So yep.
Okay.
And of even spin-offs called the Dispatches series, where you explore stories in between books, featuring more animals, and even exploring other parts of the world. Some stories that will be taking place from the point of view of the dinosaurs themselves.
Oh, good.
So yeah, I'll definitely, after the show, have to send you the goods. Because I think you'll definitely enjoy the stories here. And some of this is not just about the dinosaurs, there's also a strong human story in here as well.
Oh, good.
Given the first book is set during Vietnam, it does not shy away from the controversial aspects of the war itself.
I see posted the West of Eden books. Yes.
Yes. I have not have yet to read those, but I think they can make for some interesting films and all that.
Right. Also, the let's see, what was it called?
There's so many I've been checking out and all
Bones
that.
of the Earth was a good one. Also, Sawyer's series, Farseer and its sequels, where
I've heard of those.
Dinosaurs are the central point of view characters. It's a world seeded by an ancient alien civilization from Earth, but the creatures that they seeded it with were dinosaurs, and they boosted up the intelligence of tyrannosaurs. Actually, it was Nanotyrannus at the time, so for what that's worth. So the lead, the main intelligence on these worlds are intelligent tyrannosaurs. And so it's told from their point of view and how they eventually sort of realize aspects of their world. So they'd become some of the first scientists in their world and so forth, and try to figure things out about how the world came to be. So that would be a cool one.
So what about time travel stuff like Primeval and such like that? Those could definitely make for some good stories when if told well.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, now he has some other says about the Jurassic Park films and book. Which scenes from both Jurassic Park the film and the book do you like more? Like him for Sylvie, he says he liked John Hammond's demise in the book and the Brachiosaurus' first appearance in the film series. And he also asks, have you read the Dragon Riders of Pern series by Anne McCaffrey? And
Oh my
what do you
God.
think?
So yes, Dragon Riders when I was young was like that was one of my top series to read. And when I was reading them at the time that the White Dragon came out. So I got like when it was first released, the hardcover edition of that, and Dragon Drums came out around that time, shortly thereafterwards. So the first four of the adult and then the young A versions were already available before I started reading, before I started reading the series. And then I read it for a while. Eventually, as her kids started to write with it as well. I think it had outlived its time, but the early stuff especially I really liked. No dinosaurs in it, but it was really cool, and I like those dragons. And I know there have been attempts to bring that to as a series, but it never got very far. So like the crew that eventually did the new version of Battlestar Galactica started, I think the original plan was to do Dragon Riders of Pern, and that shorted out, so they decided to reboot Galactica, which turned out to be much better than the original. Oh, and then as for the I would agree that I really love the scene with the Brachiosaur in the original movie. Even though rearing in a Brachiosaur is problematic, it's still a very evocative and wonderful scene. And the death of Hammond in the book is better, but that's for Book Hammond. He deserved to die more.
Yeah, Book Hammond was a
movie Hammond
world-class
was a
jerk.
much nicer person. The actual finding the solution for the Stegosaurus, as it is in the book, rather than Triceratops, would have been nice, because you actually get to see the scientific method in operation with them diagnosing what's going on and figuring it out. And they set it up, but you never get the payoff in the movie that the Triceratops has been not eating the plants, but it's been picking up gastroliths, which granted Triceratops wouldn't use gastroliths, but a stegosaur would. And that's the reason it was getting sick. And they set everything up, but you never get to see him, give that answer as to what's going on, which is a shame.
Regarding the demise of Newman, aka Dennis Nedry, which did you prefer better, book or the film? And for me, so many others, his book demise, 1000%.
As long as he dies, that's the important thing. We just have to remember that. So,
yeah, in the book, the death scene is fully detailed, and it's quite a graphic affair indeed.
Yeah.
And the Dilophosaurus is actually size accurate in the book, though I could say the film version is not being fully mature, but in the book, yep, full 6, 7, 8 plus feet tall, 2,000 pounds.
Yep.
And colored like a leopard.
Yep.
Scott says we need a more proper Land of the Lost movie here.
Yeah, I don't think I think David Gerald and the other people who worked on the original show would agree with you. That for its time, it was pretty, at least for some of the episodes, it's pretty sophisticated writing for a Saturday.
The show was good, but
show,
the movie, on the other hand, though, the film we got, that was garbage.
Yeah, exactly.
But a good movie, yes, and I would love to see another series, actually.
Yeah.
Another series. I mean, just imagine what they could do nowadays.
Sure.
I enjoyed the original 70s TV series, and I did grow up watching the one on the 1990s, and you can still watch that on the YouTube to this day, but it's never been given a home video release yet.
Oh.
Which is kind of odd.
Yeah. So I'll have to be heading out in a bit, but I don't know if anyone has any final questions.
All right, last one. I think Sylvia was asking if you were that if you knew that Draco from the film Dragonheart used the model of the T-Rex from Jurassic Park as the basis for it, and if so, what'd you think of it?
I didn't know that. That's interesting. I have to look at it again to see that. Yeah. It's weird, it's not that there are real dragons, obviously, so you can be creative with them in your own way. I don't know that I would have gone with using, Tyrannosaur as sort of the stock or as the initial thing to modify when doing a dragon design. But, there are worse things you could have started with, so.
Okay, the final question for us: what do you think of the work that Dr. Matthew Mossberger is currently doing and all that?
Oh, well, good scientist, definitely. Excellent work. Also, a lot of outreach of YouTube videos and so forth, and that cover a wide variety of topics, which is pretty cool. So, yeah, we need more people doing stuff like that.
I definitely agree. YouTube can be a good thing, but some channels are better than others. Definitely.
This is true.
So after the show, I'd be down to add my channel to that document you're making in the paleontology education group as a definite legit resource for my podcast and all that.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, excellent. Good.
All right, well, we can work on that after we wrap up here.
Okay, great.
So I'll include both my Twitch and my YouTube channels here, where I'll be posting this afterwards, and the VOD will be on my channel still.
Okay, cool.
So on that note, Doc, this is an excellent place to wrap up. So thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming back, Doc. This was a great redemption from the last one there, because I still got comments saying, okay, the audio is crap. But this time, actually, other than lag, we did quite good.
Yeah, no, this is cool.
Quite good. And live audience participation made it a much better show than I thought.
Good.
So, yep.
Excellent.
So thank you again to all my panelists that came out today. So Mike, Scott, Chris, our AK Rex. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for helping make this happen. And I'll be up since you're off. I'm off this Sunday. If Balticon's live, I might try to see if I can watch it if it's going to be live streamed.
It is. So Balticon is going to be. It starts tomorrow. It's a 4-day event. Normally, it's a in-person event, but this year, like last year, the Baltimore Science Fiction Convention is virtual. Its main venue in terms of presentations and panels and so forth is by Zoom. So if you go to the site balticon.org, you click on the schedule page and you get the Zoom links for the various talks you want to go to. There's also a GatherTown virtual experience where some of the stuff goes on. It's got a Discord channel. And eventually all the talks and presentations will be available on YouTube. Since it is a volunteer organization, it takes them a while to get them all uploaded, but they will be there eventually. So if you go, I'll be doing a talk on dinosaur updates. They do that every year. That'll be on Sunday afternoon.
Awesome.
And on Monday, I'll be talking about Charles Darwin Fossil Hunter.
Nice.
But I'm also on a couple other panels, and there's plenty of other stuff on there for people who are interested in science fiction and fantasy and real science and so forth.
This sounds like right up my alley. Then definitely.
Oh, there we go. Good. Yeah.
I love science fiction. I love fantasy. Just got done listening to Lord of the Rings, the whole trilogy on audiobook. Plus The Hobbit, narrated by Andy Serkis. So definitely.
Oh, that's cool.
So yep, it's cool. So I'm going to be getting ready to close out here. So once again, thank you for your time. Thanks for your time, Doc. And I'll definitely welcome you back on as a panelist if we ever do another pop culture talk on dinos and whatnot.
Awesome.
Definitely, of course.
Well, take care, everyone.
Yep. Have a good night.
You too.
Peace out, Scott.
Yep.
Alrighty.